Few moments, but Izuku eventually relaxed and leaned more into her. Melissa smiled again and closed her eyes. The two teens sat like that for a while, not noticing the adults watching and quietly taking pictures of the scene. Uraraka was a bundle of stress. She was laying on her bed, thinking about that night. The party itself was amazing, and she had carried home enough food to sustain her for weeks, but there was one factor that was eating at her. That factor was Izuku and Melissa. Together. The way they acted, the way they talked. They were definitely together. Somehow the angel and the green bean were a pair and she couldn't think about anything else no matter what she tried. Her chest was actually hurting a bit at this revelation. She groaned and rolled over, laying face down in her pillows. She was jealous, that much was obvious. What wasn't so obvious, though, was which one was she jealous of. Chapter end notes. So, remember my question at the end of chapter 3? On whether this FIC should have polyamory? Now you know what I settled on. Up next I'll work on the other Izumomo prompts and the next chapter of side stories. See you next year/decade. Accolades and choices chapter notes. Howdy folks. Got another chapter here for you fairly quickly. This chapter is the start of a new arc, away from the festival grind, felt more like an Elite Four grind, and leading to more events. We'll learn the identity of Nedzu's guest, get a long segment involving Izuku getting his combat-capable arm, and two girls start talking. See the end of the chapter for more notes. With the excitement of the sports festival over and done with, the following Sunday passed all too quickly and before Class 1C knew it they were back in school. The various students were either in their seats or hanging out in groups, all chatting away the morning. That was awesome. Gakushu cheered. Got so far, too. Was certainly entertaining to watch, Katsura smiled, earning a few giggles from the people surrounding the blind girl. W was really long, though, Izuku stuttered. F felt like it lasted months. But the entire thing only lasted a day, Hojo pointed out. I know right? Izuku's tirade was cut short when Midnight stepped in the room with the ringing bell. Everyone rushed to their seats as Midnight approached the podium. She had a bit of a serious face as she stood in silence, looking over her class. Thankfully, this seriousness soon dropped into a small smile. If you kids were trying to make an impression back there. She stated, you sure did. Pulling up her remote and hitting a button, the digital blackboards came to life, listing several names from their class with numbers next to them. Some of these numbers were in the low thousands. The students looked on in confusion, before Izuku's eyes widened and he pointed with his left arm. Those are internship requests. Right in one. Midnight laughed. You guys made such a big impression during the festival that Principal Nedzu decided that our class is going to participate in Hero Experience Week. Everyone up here got offers from heroes across the country, while everyone who isn't on here can still choose from a smaller roster. But, Tabata raised his hand, what if we don't want to be heroes? Or have quirks that are literally useless for hero work? There's still options, Izuku pointed out. I mean, Iwabumi W works as a rescue hero, but she also handles public relations, and is an official AMBB ambassador. Lunch Rush runs a restaurant, Arithmancer runs an accounting firm, there's a lot of heroes who do non-heroic jobs on the side. Why isn't Moriboshi up there? Sakai asked. She got further than any of us and I'm doing something else, the IC student interrupted. Not with any of those heroes. And Midori is not up there because he's doing something concerning his hero training, Midnight explained, so during lunch, kiddo, you go to Nedzu, okay? You'll be able to grab your new arm after you're done with him. Izuku nodded excitedly as Midnight started handing out the packets, or in some cases, books, of hero offers. You're required to make your decisions by Friday, and you'll be leaving Saturday or Sunday depending on where you're going. Choose where you go carefully, alright? With the packets, and books, handed out, Midnight ran through the normal morning announcements. So far the only student who was having trouble with his packet was Sakai, because... I'm sorry, the Serpentine student asked, but could someone turn these pages for me? The rest the time before lunch passed fairly calmly. His class had received congratulations from other classes as they walked by. They even received good words from upperclassmen, and that felt really nice. However, Izuku was curious why Monoma Nito seemed to be mixed in with another Gen Ed class, but figured he could ask Nedzu later. When time came for lunch, Izuku bade farewell to his classmates and jogged up to the principal's office. The door didn't look at all intimidating anymore, and he gave a gentle knock as he got close. He stepped in as the door opened, but stopped when he got inside. There was a new person in the room with Nedzu. His black outfit, looking almost like military fatigues, was the only normal thing about him. He had a rather extensive mutation quirk, looking like a muddy red dragon man but lacking wings and a tail. His gold eyes seemed to pierce into Izuku's very being, watching his every movement. He wore distinctly four-fingered gloves and leather sandals over his dinosauroid feet. As Izuku got closer, he noticed a small detail out the outfit. "Yes sir," Izuku asked, "WWI, is there a member of the Atlantic Circle here?" The Dragon Man's brows shot up. "You know of the circle?" he asked with a gravelly voice. "A little," Izuku nodded. "And not a whole lot, and mostly that you're identified by the small G gold ring on your left shoulder." He then pointed at the small object, gleaming in the office lighting like a shoulder pin. This seemed to impress the man further as he turned to Nezu. "He is a smart one." "Told you," Nezu smiled. "Take a seat, Midoriya." He waited for the student to sit down before continuing. "This is Nihilus, of the Atlantic Circle. He's here to facilitate the first part of your provisional license exam." Izuku almost fell out of his chair at this declaration. "PP provisional license exam," he gasped. "The first part of it," the Dragon Man, Nihilus, clarified. "Some of the training required to become a Type 2 hero includes helping on live cases, or studying previously solved cases to try and determine the outcome. Both things normally require a provisional license. As such, the Type 2 license is split into two parts. Completing the first part, which I will be supervising, will give you access to those records and cases, but you will not be officially allowed to do any hero work until you pass the second part. This first exam will be covering the experience week for the traditional hero courses. I'll go over it in greater detail on Saturday, but you should prep and pack for a week's departure. Until then, though, I'll be observing your training to see what you have covered." "You understood," Izuku nodded, suddenly very nervous. But, if you don't mind my asking, why did you CC come in for this, and not have a local hero assigned?" "To avoid bias," Nihilus calmly replied. "Before I stepped on Japanese soil, I only knew your name and your face. As such, when I grade your exam I won't risk going easy on you for parts that others know you're lacking in. For example, if Nezu here was the facilitator, there is the chance he would alter your scores simply because he knows you'd struggle on one part." "I wouldn't do that," Nezu smiled, "but if the risk exists it must be addressed. I honestly look forward to seeing what you can do, young man." Nihilus seemed to smile as he stood up. "I've heard about these hero analysis notebooks of yours, but haven't had the chance to browse them myself. Next we meet, I'll be taking you to your testing grounds." He gave a slight bow before exiting the office. "And with that hanging over your head," Nezu pulled out a clipboard, "let's move on to something a bit more chipper." Izuku took the clipboard and looked it over. The form on it had his school info, but it was the line at the very bottom that caught his attention. "Hero alias. You are training to be a hero," Nezu smirked. "Even Type 2s like us need to have registered hero aliases. So go ahead and put your own down." Izuku looked at the form, and was drawing a blank. When he was younger he had all sorts of hero names in mind, but then the incident with Bakuga hit and, even after entering UA and getting hero training from Nezu and Sir Nighthigh, a hero name never even occurred to him. He didn't want to chicken out and just put his actual name either. With a sigh, he set the clipboard down. "May I have a few days to think about it?" "Of course." Nezu smiled. "Just be sure to have it before Friday, alright?" "Good. Now hurry on down to your classmates for lunch, I have another task that needs tending to." Izuku nodded and dashed out the room as Nezu fiddled around on his laptop. After a few minutes, there was another knock on the door. Nezu opened the door, barely looking up as Todoroki Shudo stepped into the room. "You wanted to see me, sir," the hero student asked as he sat in the chair opposite the principal. "Your class received your experience forms earlier, correct?" the mammal asked. Todoroki nodded, and he continued, "I get the feeling you're going to accept Endeavor's offer, yes? Well, I think it would wise if you didn't do so." "What?" Todoroki asked incredulously. "I need to get a better hang of my fire side, and Endeavor is dash." His words were cut off when Nezu spun his laptop around, showing the student what was on the screen. Todoroki read a bit, and his eyes widened. "How dash, a friend of yours called in a favor," Nezu smiled. "In fact, said friend also had an offer for you. This is upside down. Is it? Looks right to me. Blue goes up, remember?" Right, my bad." Melissa and May were hard at work in the support workshop that afternoon. They were both repairing and improving a pro's gear as another extra assignment to keep them both occupied, and hopefully not explode the lab. They had spent a significant part of the day working on this one piece of equipment, but they were satisfied knowing it would be vastly improved from the previous version. Their work was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. The instant they heard it, they set their tools down before Melissa opened the door for Midoriya to slip in. The American girl had been working with May long enough to know her unwritten rule of no fiddling with potentially explosive objects while Midoriya's in the room, and adjusted fairly quickly. "Come on in, Mito-chan." Mei smiled. Ready for that new arm? Why yes. Izuku smiled. I wanna get used to it before experience week. Seeing the slightly confused looks on their faces, Izuku quickly explained what Nezu had told him during lunch, earning excited squeals from both girls, and a hug from Melissa. Once they calmed down, Mei opened a shiny metal box on the table. Sit down, little man. Izuku sat down in a nearby chair and removed his jacket and shirt down to the tank top he wore underneath, his own excitement rising as Melissa slowly went to work removing his left arm. At the same time, Mei pulled Izuku's new arm out of the box. Unlike his current arm, the new one was a polished white, with dark gray pads on the fingers and palm. The back of the hand had a small digital display on it, and the forearm had some bulkiness to it. Izuku was so filled with awe and anticipation, and the girls so focused on the task at hand, that no one said a word as Izuku's old arm was removed and replaced with the new one. Everyone was smiling, though. Once it was firmly attached, Izuku went through the same exercises he ran every morning. First he flexed each finger one at a time. Then he flexed them all at once, slowly at first but speeding up bit by bit. Along with a digital map linked to some GPS satellites. We're still trying to get the verbal comms on it working, though. For now you'll have to rely on your cell phone. Next, put your hand here. Melissa tapped a small panel on the back of his forearm. Izuku did so, feeling the panel click down a bit. He gave a shout of surprise as a long white blade emerged from his forearm, extending over the back of his hand. Tada! Melissa smiled. We know Sir Night Eye has been training you in blade use, so Hatsum-san and I decided to give you this. It's made from ultra-hard ceramic, and is beyond razor sharp. We tested it by cutting a metal workbench in half, it was quite entertaining to watch. We're working on a means to control the length that comes out, so be careful for now. Just tap that panel to sheath it. Izuku did so, watching the blade quickly slip back into his forearm. After it clicked into place, Melissa pulled his arm up and gestured to a small button on his forefinger. Hold these two fingers straight and hit this button with your thumb. Izuku held his forefinger and middle finger straight before tapping the small button, watching as two small prongs poked out from the fingertips and began arcing electricity. Mel and I figure these could be your main villain disablers, Mei smiled. The charge only holds for a few seconds and takes a couple minutes to recharge right now, but once we sort out the red matter batteries we figure we can make M recharge faster. You gotta hold the fingers still for it to work though. We designed M so that bending those fingers retracts the prongs. Helps keep from accidentally shocking yourself, you know. The display on the back of your hand will also tell you when they're charged. Izuku smiled as he bent his fingers and retracted the prongs. His arm was definitely like something from a spy movie, he was loving every bit of it. One last thing, Mei snapped his thought from his reverie. He watched as she lifted his arm, straightening it out, and tapped the panel on his inner forearm. Just when he thought nothing else about his arm could surprise him, his widened as a shield seemed to unfold from a pair of slots on either side of his arm. The shield was fairly small and see-through, but this meant he could see the fibrous interior. Polymer shield, Melissa pointed. Large enough to cover center mass, flexible enough to furl up inside your arm when not in use. We tested it earlier to ensure it's also bulletproof against pistol rounds and really resistant towards rifle bullets. Also effective against bladed weapons. Just be careful around puncture-based weapons, like arrows or pickaxes. Too strong a hit on a small spot will go through. Melissa tapped the panel and the shield curled back into Izuku's arm. That's all we got in there so far, Mei nodded and tapped his arm. Mel and I are working on a few more ideas, but we need to test those before we try installing them. So, what you think? A work of art, Izuku smiled as he stood up, looking over his arm again. Thank you so much FF for this. Both of you. His expression and earnest gratitude was so adorable both girls pulled him into a group hug. This surprised the green bean, putting a deep blush on his face. In the end, he closed his eyes and reciprocated the hug. He had the best friends, and crush. Are you sure about this decision? All Might asked Uraraka as the two sat in the teacher's lounge. Yes sir, she nodded. I appreciate the offer from Gran Torino, but I can't accept it because he's the one who trained you. He'd probably focus on training me exactly like he trained you, but I'm not your clone, copy, or illegitimate child like Todoroki-kun thinks. I want to make this quirk my own, but I can't do that if I follow your exact footsteps. The hero and student stared at each other for a while before All Might sighed. Forging your own way, the hero smiled. I look forward to seeing what exactly you make of it. Thankful he wasn't mad, Uraraka smiled, bowed and quickly left the lounge. School had ended earlier, and she had already decided which hero to go with, despite the literal tome of agency offers she got. As she hustled down to the gates, something gold caught her eye. Turning to get a good look, she froze when she saw it was Melissa. Said girl was walking down the hallway in her direction, reading from a book, so she likely hadn't seen Ochako yet. The taller first year looked at her for a bit, going over things in her mind, before taking a breath. Melissa-san. Ochako called out, grabbing the third year's attention. The girl looked up as Ochako jogged towards her. Hey, fancy meeting you here. I was, hoping to ask you a question. Oh, sure, Melissa closed her book. What would you like to know? It's about you and Midoriya-kun. Uraraka nervously kneaded her hands together. I was wondering if you two were, dating? Melissa finished. Ochako nodded, too nervous to verbalize her answer. Melissa looked away to think for a few seconds. I wouldn't say we're an official couple yet. Poor boy's still too nervous to do more than hug or even hold my hand, despite my best efforts. Uraraka wasn't quite sure how to feel about that. On one hand, since they weren't officially together, she might have a chance at one or the other. But the way Melissa responded. Do you like him too? Melissa asked. Uraraka looked back at her, still blushing. She tried to reply, but not even air came out her mouth. If she admitted she liked Midoriya, how would Melissa react? How would she react? She learned Uraraka kinda had a crush on her, too. In that moment, arranging her thoughts to form a cohesive answer felt like she was trying to milk a rock. As she struggled with this, Melissa pulled a notebook from her pocket, wrote something on it, and held it out for Ochako to take. It took a few seconds for Ochako to register Melissa was giving her something, and she slowly reached out and took it. Looking at it, the paper held a phone number along with the name of a mall and a date and time. A few night. SOA. Meet me at the front fountain of that mall at that date and time, Melissa replied. We'll have a girl talk concerning our little green bean. Sound good? Ochako was still in a bit of a daze, but managed to give a nod before rushing away, too flustered to even say goodbye. Melissa, meanwhile, watched her go with a calm expression. The blonde girl said once she was alone. I wonder how this will go. Chapter end. Note: sorry if it felt like this chapter was more dialogue than action. Just laying down the groundwork for certain future events. I also know that a fair few of you are gonna get worried about who's going where, but don't worry, it'll all work out. XD. Next chapter, I'm gonna try to get that girl talk between Melissa and Ochako down, but I humbly beg forgiveness if I mess it up. I'm a guy who literally can't take a hint, so I will definitely mess a few things, but hopefully I'll do it accurately enough. We'll also see Izuku get his hero uniform, choose his name, and possibly the start of a few experience weeks for our cast, both Hero and Gen Ed. See you next time. Choices and Determination. Chapter notes. Howdy folks. We got another week-spanning chapter here, like the training montage back in chapter 10. It might be a bit shorter than I usually post, but there's a lot going on. Some of it laying the foundation for future events, and some of those are comedic in nature. Hope you enjoy things. See the end of the chapter for more notes. A whole week? Inko asked her son with worry while they ate dinner. You're gonna be gone a whole week? Yes, Izuku affirmed. PP part of my Hero T training. Gonna be gaining experience on how hero agencies actually function. It'll serve as a long exam of sorts. A week-long exam, Inko sighed. I had one or two of those when I went to UA, but they never had me leave town. Weren't you in MA management, though? Izuku asked with a slight chuckle. Inko just laughed and batted her son with a napkin. The two shared a good-natured napkin fight until they heard knocking at the door. Inko stood up to open it while Izuku straightened the table back up. As she opened the door, she was greeted with a surprising sight. Sir Night-Eye. Inko voiced, making Izuku choke on his drink. The pro-hero nodded as Inko let him step in. Izuku quickly got up to greet the pro-hero, noticing he was carrying a suitcase. I apologize for disturbing your evening, Night-Eye said. I meant to get this to you at school, young Midoriya, but I was stuck on some work. He held out the suitcase, and Izuku slowly took it, confusion clear on his face. It's your hero uniform. Am I what? Izuku stuttered. But I didn't submit any DD designs. I am aware, Night-Eye explained, which is why you didn't get this before today. May I? The group moved to the table and sat back down before Night-Eye continued. You're allowed to change the design in the future if you wish, but for now we'd like you to wear this during your trial this upcoming week. We had to get your measurements from the last time you got fitted for a school uniform, but I believe you will find that outfit a bit more comfortable. Izuku took this moment to open the suitcase, and gasped at the contents. It was an almost exact copy of Night-Eye's own outfit. A formal-looking suit with a black shirt and dark green tie. The jacket and pants looked black at first, but when the light hit them they shimmered a dark green. Izuku slowly picked up the coat, and gasped at the weight of it. Feeling it between his fingers, he could also tell it was not regular cloth. It felt like silk, but seemed more full, if that made any sense. It's made from the same durable material as many heroes' uniforms, Night-Eye explained as Izuku and Inko admired the coat. That by itself gives the suit some added durability, but the main defense is the coat lining. I'm sure you're feeling the weight of it. That's an American-made compound called Dragon Weave. Flexible, undetectable, but also virtually bulletproof. Unlike your polymer shield, it can even stop rifle rounds, but the impact from said rounds will still hurt. Speaking of your shield, the girls were kind enough to inform me of your arm's design before I placed the order for the suit, so if you look you will see your left sleeve has slits to accommodate it. The coat and pants also have a fair few hidden pockets to hold knives or small tools. Also, biggest detail, it's machine washable. Izuku had been in a stupor throughout Night-Eye's explanation, but laughed at that finishing joke. Between his arm and this suit, his day had been beyond amazing. Nodding his thanks to Night-Eye, the pro hero smiled and stood up. One more thing, he said as he reached into his back pocket. After a moment, he pulled out a large straight knife, with a sheath, and set it on the table in front of Izuku. Consider this a personal gift from me. Can never have too many blades after all. This time, Izuku shot from his seat and hugged Night-Eye. The pro hero stumbled a bit, not from the impact but from surprise. After a moment, he smiled and returned the hug. He really was getting attached to this kid, huh? I'm going with Iwabumi, Asano stated while Class 1C was heading down for lunch on Tuesday. You sure? Hayashida asked. I heard she mostly does commercials and dash, that's why, Asano interrupted. I want to become a model someday, and who's better to learn the basics from? A model? Kagero asked confusedly. I thought you didn't like people gawking at you. It's complicated, was Asano's answer. That's her way of saying she wants to get noticed by Dash, was all Oyuniko managed to say before being comically slapped out off his feet by said classmate. I'm not sure who I could go with, Hojo Kimura sighed. All I got is a long tongue, and I'm not sure who would even want that. You'll find someone, Sakai patted her shoulder with his chin. I'm going with Iwabumi too. She has that whole snake motif, so I think I'll fit in. What about you, Oscar? Gakushu asked the small mouse boy in the very back. You choose anyone yet? And not yet. Oscar fidgeted. Chu go on ahead without me, guys. I need to do something. With an affirmation from his classmates, he dashed away from the group. Once he was around the corner, he pulled out the letter that was hidden inside his desk this morning. Someone wanted to talk to him in private. He didn't know who nor why, but the letter made it seem like it was important. The letter asked him to meet said individual by one of the restrooms in the back of the main building, so that's where he rushed. Weaving between the other students, he got to his destination fairly quickly. Still nervous, he stood by the fountain between the restroom doors, waiting for whomever wrote this letter. After a few minutes, the hallway was empty. Where were they? Was this a prank? It wouldn't be the, "You're here," a familiar voice called. Oscar froze. He knew that voice. Looking over, he saw none other than Yayorozu Momo. The tall hero student was smiling as she approached Oscar. Why you wrote this letter? Oscar asked. Did Chu need help with something? Not quite, Momo smiled as she stood in front of Oscar. I've been keeping an eye on you, Oscar. I've been watching how you act, how you speak, and that's kinda creepy, the mouse boy stated, earning a laugh from Momo. Sorry, she continued, but the point I was getting to is, well, I like you, Oscar. A lot. In the romantic sense. She smiled and watched as Oscar's ears turned a deep red, and she swore she saw some steam pouring from them. Anyway, I was wondering if you would like to have dinner with me tomorrow night. Excuse you. Both students were startled by the sudden exclamation, and even more surprised when Maria Draconis just emerged from the girls' restroom like a dragon exiting their cave. Considering Maria's quirk, this might not be a bad comparison. The blue-scaled upperclassman was glaring daggers at Momo as she moved next to Oscar. I feel I should remind you, Maria hissed, that Oscar is my manservant. Oh, I'm aware, Momo glared back, but being your servant doesn't prohibit him from finding romance outside his job. It does when I've already claimed him. Oscar tried to speak, but was ignored by the angry girls above him. Claim him? Momo growled. I was unaware Americans still viewed people as property. You know very well what I mean, Yayorozu. Don't assume I'm a heartless shrew like you. That's rich coming from a greedy scaly like you. Gee girls. Oscar whimpered as the two girls were literally head to head. The tension in their glares was so intense Oscar was certain that, if he stuck a piece of paper between them, it would catch fire. Oh wait, there were small trails of smoke trickling from Maria's mouth. There actually could be fire. Obsidian harlot. Horn head. You're only in this school because you're an over-endowed brat. And you're so hideous that your company stock drops 15% every time you look out the window. After that string of vitriol, the two girls just glared at each other while baring their teeth. Oscar was legitimately fearing for his life now. He felt like he was caught between a dragon and a griffin, and his minor presence was the only thing sparing his life. After several seconds of tense silence, Maria spoke with a level tone. I get him Mondays and Wednesdays, you get him Tuesdays and Thursdays. Fridays we share, Momo expanded, and weekends he either rests or is with the girl of his choosing. The two girls shook hands, their eyes full of determination. As they shook on their business deal, Oscar stared between the girls in confusion. What just happened? Uraraka was hustling through the mall as fast as safely possible. It was Wednesday evening. She had chosen which hero to spend the week with, she had gotten improvements done to her hero uniform, and today was the day Melissa wanted to meet her to talk about Izuku. She was understandably nervous. How was she supposed to act here? How would Melissa react if she learned just how big a crush she had on the green bean? Or even on her? Why couldn't stuff like this be easy? As she walked down a set of stairs, she gave a brief glance at the two boys walking past her, recognizing them as some of Midoriya's classmates. I'm serious, man. Tabata waved his hands. Just like that, disaster averted. No fussing, very little drama, and they just shook hands on it. Fascinating, Yoshio nodded. If only actual harem anime could be resolved so peacefully. Uraraka gave the two boys a confused look as she passed them. What on earth were they talking about? Whatever, not important right now. Turning back, she saw the fountain Melissa had mentioned. She couldn't see the blonde anywhere. Hustling over, she sat down next to the fountain and waited. She still had a few minutes before the preset time, but that also meant she had a few minutes to get even more nervous about this. Thankfully it seemed like Melissa had the same idea, as Uraraka had been sitting less than 2 minutes before the upperclassman made her appearance. You're here early, Melissa smiled as Uraraka stood up. Come on, we'll talk over some food. Ochako followed Melissa through the mall to the food court. After getting there and ordering food, with Melissa paying for it, the two sat at a nearby table. The food helped Uraraka's nervousness a bit, but soon came time for the talk. So, Melissa smiled over her slushie, about Midoriya. I like him, Uraraka admitted. I mean, who wouldn't? He's kind, caring, always wanting to help everyone around him. And you like him more than just liking him, right? Melissa asked, still smiling. This got a squeak from Uraraka and her face turned pink. If the table they were sitting at weren't bolted to the floor, it might have started floating. As is, Uraraka was simply gripping the edge hard enough to make a few cracks. The blonde bombshell sitting across from her saw this and giggled, her voice flustering Ochako even more. I see you do, Melissa stated. And I guess seeing him walk away with me gave you some negative feelings, huh? And more than that. Uraraka looked down. This confused Melissa. It was another few moments before Ochako continued. I have feelings for you, too. This got a reaction from Melissa, whose eyes widened. Ochako took a breath. May as well get it all out there, right? Ivy had feelings since the festival, when I saw you at the fountain after the cavalry battle, and for Izuku even earlier. Ivy never felt this way for even one person before, so to get that feeling for two people, and see they're together. There was another silence between the two girls. Even the usual chatter of the food court seemed muted after that open confession. Uraraka couldn't even look at Melissa, too afraid of how the older girl would react. She tensed up when she heard Melissa giving a soft giggle. That certainly makes things easier, possibly, Melissa piped up. Uraraka looked back up at her as the support course student grinned and rested her chin on her hands. Uraraka-chan, didn't ever occur to you that all three of us could get together? The brunette's eyes widened. Of course, Melissa continued, looking off to the side, I'd have to bring this up with Midoriya-kun, see what he thinks. I mean, I might be more in charge, but I don't want to pressure him or make him feel like he's unwanted. This'll be something to discuss. Why you're not weirded out? The hero student asked. I mean, I did just confess that I liked both of you, and we're girls, and that's not an issue with me, Melissa smiled back at Uraraka. I thought you were cute too. Midoriya-kun knows that. I complimented your legs when we walked away Saturday night. Why you like me legs? Uraraka was blushing even more now. You kidding? Melissa laughed. Those things look plush and go all the way up. Almost makes me jealous. Anyway, I'll have to talk to Midoriya-kun about it, but I think I'm open to the three of us getting together if you are. Sound good? Uraraka was in a flustered haze at what she just heard. That wasn't how she expected this to go at all. She never even considered what Melissa suggested as a possibility. And here she was, being offered just that. Before she answered, she remembered those two boys she'd passed on her way here, and what they were discussing. She'd have to ask if anyone in Izuku's class had a precognitive quirk. On Thursday morning, Izuku found himself back in Mei's workshop. His arm had glitched up a bit the previous night, and the semi-explosive girl was tinkering away with his detached arm while Izuku sat on a bench next to her. They were alone in the workshop, as Mei's usual tinkering had scared the rest of her class into moving to a different shop. And with that in mind, Mei smirked. I presented what I knew and won that game. Wow, handsome-san, Izuku said with stars in his eyes. I had no idea you were so good at DD detective work. One of my many talents, Mito-chan, the inventor smiled as she fiddled with his arm more. So, figure out your hero name yet? And no, Izuku sighed. I got a lot of ideas, but none of them feel right. Can always just throw the better ones into a hat and pick one. Mei waved her hand. That's what my cousin did. After another minute, she scooted closer to Izuku and went to work reattaching the arm. Once it was locked, she had him go through his exercise again. So, what was wrong with it? Izuku asked. One of the wires for an internal component was a cheap piece of junk, Mei shrugged. Anything else you needed, Mito-chan? I won't be available during lunch cause my cousin's coming to visit. Izuku smiled and was about to say something, but stopped. Mei got curious when she saw the contemplative look on his face before he turned back to her. Actually, there is one thing. Later that afternoon, just before school ended, Izuku was in Nedzu's office, turning in his student form with his chosen hero name. Nedzu looked over the form, and when his eyes fell on the alias, he looked back up at Izuku. You sure about this, young man? The mammal asked. It'll be a hassle to change it later if you want to. I am certain, Izuku nodded. I spoke to the previous bearer of that name earlier, and he seemed happy at the idea. I owe the Hatsums for so much. Doing this for them, carrying the name forward, is the least I could do for them. Nedzu smiled at Izuku's answer and nodded before giving the form his stamp of approval. Name, Midoriya Izuku Hero alias, the analysis hero, scouter, tomorrow's the big day, huh? Melissa asked Izuku as they walked together Friday night. They had gotten into the habit of nighttime walks just as a way of chatting and relaxing, but always made sure Izuku got home before it got too late. I leave early in the morning, Izuku nodded. Sorry, I can't be there to see you off, Melissa gave a sad smile. There's something I need to do in the morning. Important stuff. She didn't want to talk to Izuku about the potential relationship between them and Ochako until after the week was over either. She didn't want to potentially sabotage him with such a distraction. It's alright, Izuku beamed. I'm glad we could hang out tonight. With that, the two walked in silence for a little while longer, both basking in the other's presence. As they neared Izuku's apartment, they were both wishing the walk could have lasted just a bit longer. I guess we part ways now, Melissa looked down at Izuku. See you in a week, you adorable green bean. Izuku didn't say anything, but stared up at her with a blush on his face. She was about to leave before Izuku slowly gestured at her. It took a moment for her to realize he wanted her to lean down a bit. Curious, she did so and was surprised/rewarded with Izuku going on his tiptoes and giving her a quick peck on the cheek. Both teens stared at each other after that, blushing in their own ways before Izuku bowed his head and ran off, too flustered to speak after what he did. Melissa watched him go, her face forming a big smile before she started laughing. Of all the things Izuku could have done this night, that was the last thing she'd have ever expected. She was proud of him, in fact. Her little man was really getting confident in himself, and that was a very good thing. That little peck on the cheek was the highlight of her night. Sadly, such a thing was about to be dampened as she pulled out her cell phone. It was time to make sure she could actually do the thing she needed to do. Pressing a button, she waited as the line rang. Hey, Uncle Mite. I was wondering if we could talk about something tomorrow morning. Chapter end note: some of you were told Izuku would be a bit daring in the future. X3 there you go. Sorry I couldn't squeeze in the scene of some of the students actually leaving for their weeks. Figured such a scene would detract from the peck scene, and from what Melissa's thing was. The thing between Momo, Oscar and Maria won't be a big, upfront thing, just a little something to keep an eye out for and laugh at later. I do got one big thing planned for it, but that'll be the grand finale of their lil arc. Next time, we see what exactly Izuku's exam entails, we see where some students go, and chances are a lot of you will be screaming at the end of the next chapter. X3 see you later. Determination and Innocence chapter notes. So, remember how I said I work fast when I get really hyped for upcoming scenes? Yeah, that's why you get 2 chapters in 2 days. Also cause I'ma try working on Cobalt Star after this, so it might get slow for a while. Anyway, sorry if this chapter feels janky. I wanted to show snippets of different viewpoints, along with a few big events. Also, if you forgot from last time, you will scream at the end of this chapter. Also, when you get to the part where music is involved, listen to https://www.youtube.com/watch v equals biodxlhiw84. I would have slipped the link inside the chapter, but felt that would ruin the feeling. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. The sun had yet to rise that Saturday morning, and Midoriya Izuku was hustling to the train station. In one hand was the suitcase with his hero suit and gear, and strapped to his back was a large black backpack. Now that Izuku had 2 arms, he could actually use one of those again, but it felt kind of weird doing so after a year without it. He wasn't really nervous, thankfully. He didn't know what his week-long exam would entail yet, but he was more excited and eager than nervous. As he rushed into the train station, his cheerfulness dropped a bit when he saw his facilitator, Nihilus, was already waiting for him. The Type 2 hero saw him and waved, getting Izuku to come up faster. Thankfully, the Draconic hero didn't look like he was mad at all. He gave the nearby clock a glance as Izuku rushed to meet him. "You're here early," he said. "Just that excited to get started, huh?" "Why yes sir." Izuku nodded. I am really looking forward to what this exam will entail." "Yeah, let's see how long that lasts." Nihilus chuckled and gestured for him to follow. "You ate breakfast, right? We got a bit of a trip ahead of us." Izuku nodded, and Nihilus nodded back. The two walked in silence to the trains, purchasing their tickets and being among the first to get aboard. With their cases stowed away and having almost an entire car to themselves, they relaxed in the seats until the train got started. The moment it started moving, Nihilus reached into his vest and pulled out a packet of papers. Pulling down the tray in front of him, he set his phone up to play some music, obviously to set the mood, and set the papers in front of Izuku. "Welcome to the first half of your provisional license exam," Nihilus stated. "It will last 7 days, depending on your behavior and circumstance. You will be spending it with 2 different hero agencies, staying with each one for 3 days with Saturday as the closing day to go over a few more tests before receiving your final score that night. There are 4 main criteria you will be graded on, but each one will also overlap with each other to some degree. The first category," he continued, "is analysis. This category is the broadest, and has some effect on the rest. Your grade here will depend on how good you are at spotting details, at reading any given situation. I've heard your journals are super detailed, but I must warn you doing that sort of thing could lower your score here. I could suffer P penalties for having a lot of information?" Izuku asked quizzically. "Part of analysis," Nihilus explained, "is figuring out how pertinent it is to a situation and focusing on that. For example, you might be able to figure out a villain ate pastrami with cheddar cheese for lunch earlier that day, but that information really isn't too important when they've got a gun shoved up your left nostril. Why do I get the feeling? That's from P personal experience." The next category, the hero continued while turning some papers over, is judgment. This is a big one as well. In whatever situations you face, you will have to judge how best to proceed. If a villain is holding a hostage, do you rush in to defuse the situation faster at risk of escalating things? Or do you wait for help to arrive, which carries the risk of driving the villain to impatience? Neither answer by themselves is wrong, which is why you must use the information you have to decide which is the safer option. You will be graded on how fast you reach a conclusion, and the results of your decisions. With me so far?" Izuku nodded in reply, and Nihilus flipped a few more pages. Category 3 is combat. Type 2s might have a bigger focus on intelligence gathering, but even we have to fight on occasion. Combat and analysis overlap the most due to their very nature. If you can keep things from escalating to combat, that's good, but if combat is unavoidable, you'll need to have sharp reflexes to keep yourself and others from being harmed. You'll also need to watch your opponents, looking for weaknesses and openings to exploit. Sometimes you'll have no choice but to rush in to stop casualties, but if you can, try to figure out a few things about an opponent before moving to attack. If you don't get into any fights during this week, you'll be sparring with me on Saturday so I can gauge how you fight. The last category is conduct. This one is the most simple, yet among the most important for any hero. Your conduct is how you truly carry yourself. Everyone has a face and personality they show to the media, but who are you really? Are you a jerk obsessed with fame? Focused on fortune? Your conduct is who you are when there's no one else around. This is the category most applicants flunk because of how fickle the grading process can be. "I'll do my best," Izuku nodded. "Good. You can earn 100 points from each category, for a maximum of 400. You will need a final score of at least 275 to pass. Warning you now, fewer than 30% of applicants actually pass this their first try, so don't feel bad if you don't. Most of the time, instructors use the first-year tests as a means of learning where their students are struggling so they can adjust their training accordingly. If you pass, you'll be taking the other half of the provisional license exam during that same year. You have 3 attempts before you graduate UA, and most applicants pass during their second try. Any questions? Izuku thought for a moment, if I got sick during the week, is there any way to take a makeup exam? I honestly don't know, I'll have to ask. Also, one more thing. Nihilus reached into his vest and pulled out an object before handing it to Izuku. It looked like a battery station for a smartphone, but had a large round button on one side. Carry this on you at all times. It's a GPS locator and a distress beacon. If you find yourself in a combat situation you don't think you can handle, hit the button here and I'll rush in. And before you even begin thinking it, hitting this button is not an automatic fail for the exam. There is no shame in calling for help when you feel outmatched. Understood? Got it, Izuku nodded. He looked back down at his ticket for a moment. So my exam is in Yabin City? Oh, no, Nihilus replied. We just need to stop in there so I can grab a few things for the commission representative that will be meeting us in our real destination. Once we get there, we'll take a day to get you squared away and you'll be starting tomorrow morning. I see. And where is the real destination? Hosu. The same morning Izuku and so many others were on trains to their work experience, Melissa was waiting in one of UA's teachers' lounges. Nedzu had graciously lent one to her for the upcoming conversation. It wasn't one she was looking forward to, but it was one she needed to have. There was a knock on the door before it opened. She watched as All Might, in all his muscle-bound glory, walked into the room with his trademark smile. She looked over his form, noting it had not changed much since she was younger. Maybe he seemed a bit bigger, but overall what she saw had barely changed over the years. She also knew she was looking at a lie. You can change, you know, Melissa deadpanned. All Might's eyebrow twitched and he opened his mouth to say something, but Melissa spoke up again. I know that's not the real you, Uncle Might. I need to talk to you about something important, so I need to talk to you, not the mask you wear. There was a short silence before All Might dejectedly sighed and seemed to explode into a mass of steam. Melissa hated needing glasses as her lenses fogged up. Pulling out a cloth, she wiped them down and waited for the steam to clear before putting them back on. Seeing All Might be so skinny was a real shock to her, but she did her best to keep a level expression. Sorry for lying to you about this, All Might sighed. I didn't want anyone to know I was, like this. It's alright, Melissa smiled. I know what you mean, but this isn't the subject I want to discuss. Her expression hardened. What is your view on quirkless people? All Might coughed at the surprise, and Melissa saw a few drops of blood on the edge of his mouth. Worrisome. She'd ask later, after this conversation ended. All Might stuttered before answering, quirkless people are people. They shouldn't be considered anything less just because they don't have something that the rest of us possess. I mean, look at you. You're the most brilliant inventor I know, and what if I wanted to be a hero? Melissa glared. If I told you I wanted to be a hero when we first met, what would you have said? Would you have been just as supportive as you are now, or would you have told me to be realistic? At this question, he really did cough up blood. Melissa was greatly worried about that, but she couldn't stop, couldn't show any softness. Why you're talking about young Midoriya? He asked. I'm talking about me, the quirkless girl tersely replied. About all the quirkless people who look up to you, who idolize you, who use your words to get through their days in a society that demeans and belittles them simply because they exist. You say you work to make people happy, but how happy would they be if they learned you thought that quirkless meant worthless? I never meant that. All Might shouted fearfully. Then why did you imply it to Midoriya-kun? Melissa's eyes narrowed. Why did you make him think the world's greatest hero thought he was worthless? And why haven't you apologized to him yet? There was silence after that. All Might clearly didn't know how to answer that, and it hurt Melissa to know that. With a sigh of her own, she got to her feet and walked toward the door. She turned back to him just before opening it. You'd better talk to him when he gets home, she glared. Otherwise, I might only see you as All Might. With those parting words she exited the lounge, ignoring All Might calling out to her and leaving him reeling in shock and shame. Sunday Edgeshot looked over the file in his hands, then at the rotund student before him. Gakushu Hifumi was standing straight and looking at the hero, looking calm and confident. However, he couldn't hide the sweat on the side of his neck, nor the slight shaking of his knees. He was scared, and trying to hide it. Good. You impressed me, Edshot finally spoke after almost 10 minutes of silence. Your performance in the festival was quite interesting. Never thought I'd meet another person with a quirk similar to mine. You tried to enter the hero course, correct? Yes, Gakushu answered. I wanted to be something like a sneaky hero, with how my quirk works. Though, with what Midoriya-kun helped me develop for the tournament, I think I would like to learn how to fight as well. Which is why I sent you the invitation, Edshot nodded. I think I could help you out with that. It won't be easy by any means, but I think you can handle it. Gakushu saluted at this, and Edshot laughed. First, let's see your limits, shall we? When Todoroki heard about the experience week offer, he took it without hesitation. If he had known it would require him and his partner to walk almost 2 kilometers through a mountain forest, he would have brought better shoes. As is, the only nice thing about this trip so far was said partner. We're almost there, Moriboshi stated. I've been here a few times, I recognize that tree. Why does your uncle work all the way out here? Todoroki groaned as he stepped over a log. Does he work on rescuing campers or something? Oh, this isn't his usual work area, she replied. He's just bringing us here because I asked him to. Why? Did you think I forgot my promise? Moriboshi warmly smiled. I told you I'd teach you what's safe for you to learn, and my uncle taught me most of what I know. And watch it. She grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back before a stone spike impaled the tree next to him. What the hell? Todoroki gasped. The last test, his Gen Ed companion pointed out. Greetings. A voice called out. Both students looked up to see a shimmering white ninja hanging upside down from a tree. Name is Moriboshi Adaru, though you can call me Uncle Frosty. You want to learn ice techniques? You want to practice with your fire in a safe environment? Prove to me you can keep up. The last half-kilometer between here and my compound is covered in traps. Get there before sundown with fewer than 20 cuts or injuries and you're golden. See ya there, kiddies. And with that, the ninja leaped between trees and disappeared into the forest. Are you from a family of ninjas? Todoroki asked. Tell you later, Moriboshi patted his shoulder. Race ya to the end. And word of advice, do not step on any logs. Todoroki nodded, and the 2 students rushed forward, leaping over the first log. Compared to what his father put him through, this was nothing. He would do this in MHA pit trap. Iwabumi looked at the 3 students close to the doorway as she applied makeup. Yaoyorozu Momo, Asano Ryoko and Sakai Hibi. She had initially invited Yaoyorozu because she was pretty, but seeing the fierce confidence and determination emanating off her was interesting. However, before we begin, why did you 3 accept my invitations? Iwabumi asked. Because you're a hero who specializes in media appearances, Asano piped up. I myself would like to be a model someday, and you're one of the best. You're also an official ambassador, Momo pointed out, making you one of the few heroes who has legitimate political capabilities. While I am uncertain you'd expose students to such a climate, I am certain I will learn something during this week. Iwabumi nodded at their answers before turning to Sakai. I'm a snake, he stated, and you're one of the few heroes that actually requested me. I presume you wanted me for a mascot for your commercials. Fair enough, the media hero stood up, straightening out her dress. I will admit, I first requested you 2 girls because you were cute, and Sakai-kun for the reason he stated. However, looking at you now I can tell there's more to you than pretty faces. The students might have been offended at that statement before Iwabumi smiled at them and continued, we'll still be practicing for a commercial, though. Heroes give interviews all the time, and acting skills can make or break any career, from a hero to a model. I'll help you prepare for such things. Now sit down and let's see what makeup works for you. The girls nodded and sat in the makeup chairs, Momo glancing at her phone as she did so. She hadn't received any message from her partner, and was worried how her little mouse was faring with his choice. Empty Lady was in shock. Her apartment was, for lack of a better term, a thing of beauty. The floors were mopped, the counters were polished, pretty much every surface had been cleaned to perfection. The trash had been emptied, her framed college degrees were straightened and dusted, and she had watched as any spoiled food had almost magically disappeared from her fridge. She looked at the clock on the wall before looking back down at the diminutive mouse boy next to her. He had been here for less than an hour and her apartment was cleaner than it was when she moved in. How? She voiced. I help clean an entire mansion every weekend. Oscar chirped. Getting an apartment squeaky clean is nothing. He sounded so cheerful at that. Looking at him, the heroine saw his innocence, saw just how earnest he was in his desire to serve and help. She had told him to clean her apartment because she assumed he was a pervert like almost every other boy who tried for her, but now she felt kind of bad forcing that task onto him. With a laugh, she gently ruffled his hair. Think you can handle doing a patrol with me? Yes, ma'am. Ochako grit her teeth as she pressed her shoulder against the wide metal plate. With her on one side and close to 7 sidekick pros on the other, she was using one for all just to keep from being pushed over. Gunhead supervised the exercise as another 2 sidekicks joined in, forcing Ochako to go harder. She didn't feel the telltale pains of cracking bones, but she knew she was approaching her limit. Feeling a little tired, Uraraka-san? Gunhead asked. Need to stop. It is only your first day, after all. Not even close. Ochako laughed. Using a bit more effort, she surprised everyone by actually pushing her opponents back a few feet. Bring it on. That determination is a good thing, Gunhead pointed, but it's also just as good to recognize when you hit your limits. You might be here to push and broaden your limits, but do it too hard and you'll find yourself weaker than before. Got that? Yes, sir. The tall brunette acknowledged, gritting her teeth as more sidekicks joined in pushing her. A few of these newer ones had to have strength quirks or something, because it suddenly got a lot harder for her to stay in place. With a scream of effort, Ochako pushed forward hard as she could. There was a loud groan before Gunhead called the exercise to stop. The metal plate was set down and everyone backed away. To their surprise, the groan was from the 2-inch think plate bending into a V-shape from the forces placed on it. There was some quiet muttering from the sidekicks as they switched between looking at the bent metal and at the cute tall girl who bent it. Gunhead said after a few moments, we should move on to martial techniques now. The same afternoon as everyone else was going through their trials, Izuku was walking down the street in Hosu. His first assignment was with pro-hero Madame Foster, a heroine who specialized in locating missing children, and fostering quite a few in her agency building. She had him spend his morning looking through older missing children files to see if he could spot a pattern to them. For the afternoon she was having him run a few errands between her office and her partner's office, housing pro-hero Red Light, who focused on human trafficking cases. The 2 buildings were less than a block apart, so it was decided he didn't need a sidekick following him for this errand. They knew Nihilus was watching him from somewhere, thankfully. The Type 2 had disappeared earlier that day, saying he would be supervising from a position Izuku couldn't see him. That way, Izuku wouldn't be stressed from constantly seeing his facilitator judging his every action. He did wonder how everyone else was doing, though. Were they doing their best? Were they learning new things? Hopefully his train of thought was derailed when a small girl with white hair shot from an alley and barreled into him. Chapter end notes. I said you would scream. EP.3 not gonna spoil what comes next in any degree, so you'll just have to wait and see what happens with our little unicorn. Next chapter should be Izuku-centric, and oh boy it'll have stuff. XD see you later. Innocence and regret chapter notes. Hey folks. Mondays suck, so what's a better way to start the week than up dat? A fanfic you enjoy. Especially after the last chapter's cliffhanger. XDD in this one we see just how Izuku fights, and a little extra. Trigger warning. There is blood and a bit more. Other than that, enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Izuku staggered a bit after the impact, but the girl who barreled into him gave a scared squeak as she fell over. His training instantly took over, and he knelt in front of her to take in any and all details. After all, a child running out of an alleyway is not usually a good thing. As she slowly recovered from her tumble, Izuku took note of how her outfit resembled hospital attire. She was also barefoot, never a good thing outside, but her arms were covered in bandages. Her long white hair was a bit dirty and tangled, and one side of her forehead had a small horn poking out. When she looked up at him, her red eyes were filled with an emotion Izuku was all too familiar with. Fear. I'm not gonna hurt you, Izuku said, raising both hands. I am a good guy. When the girl didn't move, Izuku slowly and gently took her hands, making the girl gasp in fear, and helped her to her feet before letting go. There we go. My name's Midoriya Izuku. What's your name? The girl didn't respond at first, clearly skittish. She looked up at him fearfully and there you are Eri. The little girl went deathly still. Izuku also found himself intimidated by the voice. Slowly looking back up, he saw a man emerge from the alley that the girl, Eri, had previously run from. The man was pale with a thin build and average height. His hair was shaggy and brown, like a shorter version of Izuku's own hair. He wore a black shirt with matching pants and a pair of white shoes. He also wore a green jacket with purple fluff along the shoulders and collar. Overall, the most unusual things about his appearance were his white surgery gloves and a gold-embroidered plague mask. A somewhat unassuming appearance, yet his very presence filled Izuku with dread. You shouldn't just run away like that, the man continued, walking towards the pair of kids. Looking at Izuku, the man gave a curt nod and continued, I thank you for catching my daughter. I'm sorry that she disturbed you like this. She didn't disturb me. Izuku knelt back down next to Eri, slowly reaching out and grabbing her shoulder. Pulling her close, Izuku quietly whispered one question to Eri. Is this man your father? No. That single word solidified Izuku's feelings on the situation. Looking at this weird man, he slowly stood up said, I am sorry, but could you come with me to the Hero Agency J just up the street? There's been a rash of child abductions lately, and if you could answer some Q questions J just to make sure your that won't be necessary, the man continued, stopping a couple meters away. Come along, Eri. The little girl jerked at the sound of her name, and it looked like she was going to obey. Before she could take a step, however, Izuku swept her up, holding her close. Apologies, Izuku stated, but this girl is injured. If you could just follow us so we can again, that won't be necessary, the man growled. She's just a bit of a clumsy girl is all. His eyes narrowed. I will not ask again. Izuku looked at the man more, his face a mix of fear and determination. He glanced past the man for a moment before looking back at him, then did a double take to look at something behind him with a shocked expression. All might. The man turned around, his own eyes wide with shock, to look down the alley behind him. Izuku used this distraction to run away fast as he could. Directing Eri to hold him tight, he used his free hand to pull out his cell phone and dial a quick number. Madam Foster, he yelled. I am on my way to the office with an injured child. Possibly a kidnap victim. I need the ground in front of him suddenly erupted upward, creating a wall taller than the buildings around him. Looking back, Izuku saw there were walls covering most of the street, trapping Izuku and Eri in a rectangular space, with the strange man. Said man, no villain, had his right hand on the ground and was glaring daggers in Izuku's direction. Stay behind me, Izuku set Eri down and scoot her behind his back while analyzing what he could see. It was clear this man had an emitter quirk that could alter things, but the current limit was unknown, and it seemed he needed to make contact to use it. What was with all these super strong, touch-to-use, quirks? He didn't encounter so many strong ones before entering UA. Focus. Eri, Izuku whispered. Looking back at her, he slipped his hand under his coat and drew the knife Sir Night-Eye had given him earlier. He held it out to Eri, who looked at him confused before slowly taking it. If that bad man tries to grab you, poke him with that, but stay here. I'll protect you. Eri held the knife close, her eyes still wide with fear. With a reassuring smile, Izuku turned to the weird villain. The man had stood back up and was clearly mad at Izuku. One last chance, you diseased rat, the man growled. Give Eri to me and I won't reduce you to a bloody smear on the wall. Izuku responded by quickly grabbing a knife from his coat and throwing it at the man. He caught it with his left hand, and Izuku watched with horror as the knife crumbled. Perturbed but undaunted, Izuku continued his dash to the villain and punched him upside the chin with his prosthetic arm. Surprisingly, the villain was actually airborne for a few seconds. Was his arm that strong, or was the villain that weak? Maybe it was both. The villain caught himself and landed on his feet. Growling, he held his right hand to his chin, and there was a faint light before he got into a fighting stance of his own. He had no idea what that light show was, but he didn't have time to theorize either. Izuku shot forward again, narrowly dodging a swipe from the man's hand and punched him again with his right arm. The man flew back, landing on his knees. Growling through his mask, the villain slammed his right hand to the ground. Izuku guessed what was coming, and narrowly dodged the stone spikes that shot up where he stood moments prior. As he jumped away, the villain caught up quickly and shot out his left hand at Midoriya's face. Knowing he had less than seconds to react and knowing he couldn't dodge, he raised his left arm to block. He didn't want to know what would happen if that hand touched his face. To both their surprise, his hand clamped down on Izuku's arm and nothing happened. What the dash, was all the villain could say before Izuku drew another knife and stabbed his destructive arm. If he could disable that arm, he could disable the villain. The man screamed and punched Izuku in the face with his other arm, sending the small boy back a few steps. Then the man yanked the knife out of his arm and rubbed his wood with his right hand, making another small light show. To Izuku's shock, when he lowered his hand the knife wound was completely gone. His right hand could heal. But he used it to manipulate the rock before, didn't he? While Izuku was shocked, the villain looked down at his now bloody glove. Vermin like you really piss me off, he growled. Everything you stand for is a dash, wham. If there was one thing that had been ground into Izuku's skull, it was the lesson of, if a villain starts talking, deck them. A soliloquizing villain is a distracted villain, and in a real hero fight one exploits any opening they can find. Izuku did this by punching the man square in the face, breaking his bird mask in the process. The man fell backwards to the ground. With an enraged roar, he slammed his left hand down and sent more stone spikes at Izuku. This caught the boy by surprise. He could do that with either hand. That made things even more tricky. The man swiped his hands around again, trying to grab Izuku and use his quirk. Izuku dodged these wild swings with ease. The villain seemed more used to fighting with his quirk than with his body. Whereas Izuku had been trained in a few fighting styles, this man was just flailing his arms like an amphetamine-soaked circus monkey. Huh. That was not a descriptor Izuku ever thought he'd use. After a few more swings, the villain slammed his hands down and sent more spikes at the hero student. Izuku managed to dodge the spikes, but slipped on a bit of loose debris. As he stumbled, the villain shot to his feet, quickly slapping his face to heal his broken nose, and rushed at Eri. No! Izuku screamed as he spun around and charged at the villain again. His physical training was really paying off here, as he caught up to the villain in seconds. Unfortunately, said villain turned and swiped his hand at Izuku's face. Izuku's eyes widened at the sudden attack and he leaned his head to the side. He narrowly avoided the villain's fingers, but got a face full of angry fist. This hit stunned Izuku long enough for the villain get some distance. Shaking his head, Izuku rushed at the villain again, but knew he wouldn't make it in time. The villain was meters from Eri. Pulling out another throwing knife, he had a lot, Izuku pulled his arm back and ayag. The villain stumbled back, bleeding from a hole in his hand. Little Eri's arms were shaking as she held them out, her knife covered in blood. She listened to Izuku's words, and did indeed poke the villain in the hand. As the villain writhed in pain and shock from what Eri did to him, Izuku swapped his knife for some cuffs and moved in to apprehend him. As he grabbed one of the villain's hands, however, the man turned and grabbed the cuffs, destroying them in seconds. He followed up with a kick that sent Izuku to the ground, laying on his side. Then the villain knelt over Izuku, glaring at him in absolute rage. "I've had enough of you," the villain roared. Izuku knew what was coming next. With how he was laying, Izuku couldn't grab any of his throwing knives. However, his right hand was close to his left arm, specifically a certain button. Desperate and seeing no other option, Izuku slammed his hand on the button on his arm, extending his arm blade. As the villain reached down at Izuku with both hands, Izuku swung his arm upwards with a battle cry of his own. Only Eri saw what had happened next. Midoriya, Nezu gestured to the quirkless student, directing him to sit next to the mammal. They were having an outdoor hero lesson today, so the pair were sitting on one of the hills around UA. Izuku sat down, his empty left sleeve making something of a boundary between the hero and student. The boy was thankful, as he had just finished a rather tiring exercise with Night Eye. "Is something wrong, sir?" Izuku asked. No, Nezu reassured. "I just want to talk is all. A bit of an important subject." Nezu poured some tea into a pair of cups and offered one to Izuku. The two drank the tea in silence before Nezu spoke up again. "Midoriya, you have been training your body well enough, but sadly there is one lesson you must learn." Nezu took another sip of tea. "Well, I say you must learn it, but it isn't really something I can teach. Best I can do is tell you of it." "Sir?" Izuku asked, confused. "Young man," Nezu asked, "what is your opinion on grievously injuring villains? On killing them?" Izuku froze at the question. He never gave any thought to it. It was not his intention to do such a deed. He was a hero, after all. "I ask this," Nezu continued, "because any hero, even Type 2s like us, might have to face such a dilemma. Any number of villains out there could be planning to bomb a school, gas a business tower, any of a dozen things that could result in dozens of civilian deaths. And in many such cases, the only thing stopping such a terrible event is the willingness to shed the blood of the villain. Sometimes a simple injury would suffice, but sometimes. Have you ever?" "A few," Nezu nodded, filling Izuku with a cold feeling. "I have killed a few villains, and I regret every one. That's one of the things that truly separates heroes from villains, Midoriya. We regret. And in such dreadful situations, the only thing you can do is choose which regret to feel. The regret of staining your hands with blood for the greater good, or the regret of potentially letting many die in an effort to keep clean yourself. In such circumstances, the final decision is yours and yours alone. Which, regret?" There was silence in the walled-off arena. The little girl, Eri, was still frozen in place with the bloody knife in her hands. She was looking at the two men a few meters away. Izuku was laying on the ground, his arms spread wide and his eyes wide in horror. Kneeling above him was the villain, his own eyes also reflecting horror. It was a few moments before the villain looked away from Izuku and at his outstretched arms. What was left of them? Moments before the villain could grab Izuku, the hero student had swung his arm sword in a wide arc. As a result, both the villain's arms ended at the elbow. His hands were gone. The villain looked at his bleeding stubs, then down at the ground where his disembodied pieces had landed on either side of Midoriya. The villain's eyes widened as it finally set in just what had happened. My arms. At that point a portion of the wall exploded inward. Izuku turned to the spot, fearing what may come through. To his relief, the first person to step through, and likely the one who broke the wall, was one of Madame Foster's sidekicks, a red-haired, black-dressed woman known only as Dorothy. The heroine spotted Eri and walked over as other heroes flooded in from the hole. A few stopped to survey the area before spotting Izuku and the bleeding villain. The villain turned and looked at the heroes, still too shocked at what happened to resist as they pulled him away. The moment he was away from Izuku, Madame Foster knelt next to him. The gray-haired heroine gently pulled Izuku into a sitting position. Scouter, she said, addressing him by his hero alias. What happened here? Izuku slowly looked at her, looked at the villain, then looked at his bloody arm blade. Looking at the blade, seeing blood drip from the point, it made him remember another bleeding blade and the tiny pair of hands that were holding it. Eri! Izuku shouted, surprising Madame Foster. There's a little girl here. Where is Dash? She's fine, Dorothy said with an almost robotic tone as she appeared in Izuku's sight. The sidekick was currently holding Eri, who in turn was clutching the knife handle like it was a lifeline. She is in shock, however. I recommend we move to more comfortable surroundings before we try anything else. Good idea, the senior heroine nodded. Up, Scouter. She grabbed his right hand and gently pulled Izuku to his feet. Grabbing a cloth, she then carefully wiped the blood off his blade before pressing the button to retract it. She had been previously informed what his arm could do, and knew how to do that much. Izuku nodded his gratitude, slowly recovering from what happened. The area was quickly emptied as the various heroes escorted Izuku and Eri back to the office. The villain in question was tended to by one of the medical sidekicks. The sidekick couldn't reattach the villain's arms, which Izuku said would have been a bad idea anyways, but did stop the bleeding. The villain was kept on the spot until police arrived. It had been almost 2 hours since the fight ended. Izuku had shakily given his report on everything that happened, from bumping into the girl named Eri to chopping off the villain's arms. He had suffered minor injuries from the fight, and had those mended the same time other doctors inspected Eri. The little girl proved a bit difficult, as she recoiled from the doctors and would not let go of the knife. After a moment, Izuku had an idea. Removing the sheath from his belt, he gently slid it back onto the knife and carefully moved it so she was gripping it by said sheath and not the handle. This combined with multiple reassurances from Izuku seemed to calm the girl a bit, and the doctors moved in to remove the bandages from her arms. Izuku and the doctors paled at the sight that waited under those bandages. Old scars and new injuries that looked distinctly like needle marks dotted the inside of both arms. Someone had been putting a lot of stuff into this poor girl, or pulling a lot of blood out. It was clear this was why she was so scared of the doctors, and after checking her for infections and having Izuku wipe down her arms with alcohol wipes, she refused to let the other doctors touch her with them. They gave Izuku some bandages to cover her arms with and departed. The moment they were gone, Eri leaned against Izuku and quickly fell asleep. Izuku gave his own sigh as he gently picked Eri up and carried her to one of the side rooms that had a cozy couch. He gently set her down before sitting next to her, softly rubbing her hair as she slept. Even in her sleep she clutched his knife like a teddy bear. He couldn't even imagine what she went through, and was willing to let her sleep as long as she needed to. After a few minutes, Madame Foster tiptoed into the room. She informed him that he could take the rest of the day off, as it was clear Eri would only be calm around him. They would figure out what to do with her later. As for the villain he apprehended, Izuku knew what word she was about to use. He had been processed by the police. Izuku was told his name was Overhaul, and was apparently a pretty nasty villain even before they learned about Eri. Sadly, due to his student status he couldn't be told just what this villain did, but the circumstances around Eri did not paint a pretty picture. The pro-heroine smiled and promised that Izuku's skill in taking him down would be taken into account when his final score for this exam was tallied. With that, she left a small box with food and juice boxes before leaving the room. Honestly, with all the excitement that happened earlier, he kind of forgot the exam. He was about to groan when he remembered he could have used his distress beacon to call Nihilus for help, but remembered the walls of his arena were taller than the buildings around him. His facilitator would have had no way of getting inside. Suddenly his phone started ringing. This startled the poor boy a bit, and he quickly grabbed it from his jacket. Thankfully, Eri was so deep in slumber she didn't even move from all the ringing. Checking the ID, Izuku was very confused at who was calling as he held the phone to his ear. Sir Night-Eye. 2 days, young Midoriya. Sir Night-Eye screamed through the phone, almost causing Izuku to drop it. I leave you unsupervised for 2 days, and you not only bump into the villain my agency has spent 2 years trying to find, but you also managed to apprehend this villain and rescue a girl from his vile clutches. Damn it, if I were your facilitator I'd just give you your license right now and take you to Disneyland. I think that a mindset is exactly why you're not my facilitator, Izuku chuckled. Despite the noise of his outburst, Night Eye's reaction was a very much needed tension breaker. Of course, Night Eye admitted. Anyway, I also called to inform you that, due to the fact you don't have a provisional license yet, any information about your takedown will not be made public, so you can't receive any open credit for it until such time as you receive your license. But make no mistake, I will call the Hero Commission Board and inform them just how big a deal your capturing this villain is. I honestly don't care about the credit, Izuku sighed. Sir, I injured him. Battle. Why, I didn't want to, but... The event was still fresh in his mind. The fear he felt when he saw those hands coming for him, the wet cutting sound as his blade passed through Overhaul's arms like they were paper. I heard, Night Eye acknowledged. I know how you're feeling right now, but understand you did the only thing you could do. If you didn't do what you did, you'd likely be dead and that little girl would still be suffering. I'm not saying you should be proud of what you did to that villain, but you had no other choice. I know, Izuku sighed again. I regret what I did. In time, you'll come to terms with what you did, Night Eye reassured him. And when that time comes, the pain you feel right now won't even be a memory. And crap, one of my sidekicks just lit the coffee table on fire. I have to go sort that out. In the meantime, relax and calm down, alright? You did good today, Midoriya. Even if you somehow fail this exam, you're already a hero to me. See you next week. The phone clicked off, and Izuku slowly set it down. He could only hope Sir Night Eye was right. In the meantime, he was feeling a little drowsy. Scooting Eri around softly and slowly, he made enough space on the couch for him to lay down behind her. He hugged her close very much like how she was hugging the knife. It took a few minutes, but eventually Izuku's eyes drooped and he fell asleep. At the same time Izuku dozed with Eri, Shudo, and Ayam finally reached their destination. Both had a few cuts and bruises, but they walked into the open compound in the middle of the forest like they owned the place. The structure really reminded Todoroki of an old temple, with a huge courtyard dominating most of the space. It didn't look the least bit dilapidated either. He figured that someone must keep the place in food repair. And standing in the middle of the courtyard was the white-clothed ninja hero from earlier. You two made good time. Frosty the Snow Ninja laughed. And fewer than 20 wounds between the two of you. Admittedly, I know for a fact Ayam-chan there was going slowly on purpose, but you did a good job for a first-timer. I wasn't gonna leave my partner behind, Moriboshi laughed. He wouldn't have made it if I weren't there with him. Maybe, the hero laughed. Alright. Kids, allow me to welcome you to my secret training compound. The commission doesn't actually know this place exists, and I'd hope you'll help me keep it that way, right? Good. Now, what you just went through was the easy part of what you're gonna go through today, but you also got a good few years to catch up on concerning your fire side. I'll be teaching you how to use some ice techniques, but you'll also be working on your fire side. Any questions? Good gods, brother, a woman's voice chimed in from behind the two students, it's been years and you still talk too much. Moriboshi didn't react, but Todoroki turned around in shock. Standing less than a meter behind the pair was a tallish woman with long white hair. She was wearing a gold and white outfit that really reminded Todoroki of a lord's outfit from the feudal period. Her eyes were a pale blue, and they were focused on Todoroki. For some reason, this made him feel uneasy. Oi oi, Frosty pointed, don't go berating me in front of the new guy. I'm berating you, the woman deadpanned as she walked past Todoroki, giving a nod to Ayam as she did so. Todoroki, Frosty gestured to the woman who was moving to stand next to him, this is my twin sister, Moriboshi Shinobu. She's technically working as a hero in Korea, but she agreed to come back for a week to help me train you. She'll be working on your fire side, mostly. Why was she behind us? Todoroki asked. I was following you through the forest, Shinobu replied. If either of you got badly wounded, I would come and carry you to the compound. Honestly, I was more worried for you than I was for my niece, but you still impressed me. And with that, Frosty moved away from his sister, we need to see what all you can do. Go ahead and try to attack my sister here with your ice. Any attack. This confused Todoroki further. Were they going to begin combat training immediately after that hellish hike? He gave a glance to his schoolmate, and she nodded back. With slight sigh, Todoroki stretched his arms. Looking at the white-haired heroine, he slid his right foot forward, sending a line of ice spikes in her direction. Shinobu watched and simply mimicked Shido's action, sliding her right foot forward. To Todoroki's surprise, a line of white fire erupted from her foot, melting all the ice Todoroki had just conjured. She looked at where the ice was, possibly gauging something, before looking at the wide-eyed hero student. A straightforward attack reliant on brute force, Shinobu stated. Definitely Endeavor's style, but not one suited for you. Let's see what we can do about that, after dinner. Chapter end note. So, how was that fight? Hope I did it justice. I know Overhaul's got a powerful quirk, but from what I had seen he is more reliant on it than his actual body, leading him to be vulnerable to such an assault when he's by himself, and not in a place expecting a fight. I also decided to pull an FMA Scar moment there, and make it so he couldn't break something unless he knew what it was, hence why he failed to destroy Izuku's arm, as it's a new alloy. And how was that ending segment with Todoroki? We're probably gonna be seeing a bit more of him than the other hero students during this week, but we'll also be seeing more of Ochako too. Also, who can spot the Easter egg I hid in here? XD a plate of spaghetti to whomever spots who I am referring to. Next time on Type 2, a certain hero thinks about certain events, certain students go through certain thought processes, and we will probably see the beginning of a certain big event. Until next time. Regret and Flames chapter notes. Another Monday, another chapter to help you folks get through your Mondays. After this one I'm gonna focus solely on updating Cobalt Star, though. This chapter is also gonna be a bit jumpy with changing between character perspectives, but we learn a few things and this chapter ending will also make you scream. Well, enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Sunday evening in Muzutafu was a fair bit stormy, with rain and wind battering the windows of the UA Teachers' Lounge. Unfortunately for All Might, the storm outside was nothing compared to his own inner turmoil. The hero was sitting on the couch, rolling his phone in his hands. He had just finished having a conversation with Sir Night Eye, and during said conversation he had been told what Izuku accomplished earlier that day. Ever since that day Midnight beat him over the head with a poster tube, All Might had heard nothing about Izuku except for how exemplary he'd been. This small, quirkless boy had analytical skills that impressed Nedzu of all people. He also helped keep Azui and Shiozaki alive during the USJ attack. His advice helped Class 1C almost dominate the entire sports festival. And now he just got news the boy went 1-on-1 against an S-class villain and won. I really messed up, huh? All Might asked himself. Absolutely, Nedzu responded from his spot next to the hero. Gah! All Might shrieked as he flew back from the mammal principal. Principal Nedzu. What are you doing here? I could hear your internal monologue from my office, he smirked. Decided to come and see what has you in such a mood. And now you know exactly why, the pro-hero sighed. Getting back into his seat, he voiced, I messed up with that young man. I told him he couldn't be a hero, and he spent the last few weeks proving me wrong. And have you apologized yet? The principal asked. Not yet, All Might admitted. I've been meaning to, and yesterday Melissa told me she wants me to apologize to him, as well. But every time I try, I just can't think of anything to say. My mind goes blank. What can I say to a boy whose dreams I shattered? Well, Nedzu plainly stated, admitting you were wrong might be a good start. I know, I'm serious, the Type 2 hero narrowed his eyes. You've admitted to yourself you were wrong, you've no doubt admitted it to Melissa. But have you admitted it to him? To the boy who needs to hear it the most? Before All Might could reply, Nedzu slid off the couch, gave a slight bow, and exited the room. Again, All Might was alone in his thoughts. However, he was not languishing in them. The principal's words held some truth to them. All Might felt like he knew where to start. Gah! Uraraka exclaimed as she was flipped onto her back for the 5th time that afternoon. As Gunhead clapped his hands and called for another go, the Gravity Girl rolled to her knees and shot toward the sidekick she was sparring with. After beating Gunhead's larger sidekicks soundly earlier, the hero decided to have Ochako spar against trickier opponents. Her current partner was a fairly thin man with a quirk that let him move air around. Sounds harmless, but he utilized it by pulling the air under Ochako's feet and tripping her time and again. She had caught on to his tail so he didn't trip her that often, but he was still a tricky opponent. Also didn't help that he was a lot smaller than Gunhead's other sidekicks. Small and hard to catch, almost like Aizu-Kyaa. Ochako screamed as the sidekick threw her into a wall. She bounced off pretty hard and was about to rush back in before Gunhead called for a break. Honestly, that call was very welcome. Staggering back to one of the benches, she sat down while guzzling water from the gallon she had brought with her. Her back was very achy, and her limbs felt like they were made of lead. She was very tired. So tired she didn't notice Gunhead walk up and sit next to her until her softly patted her shoulder. I noticed you seemed a bit distracted earlier, he stated. Something eating at you? Promise not to tell anyone, she asked. With a nod from the hero, Uraraka leaned back. There's a boy I like, and Gunhead squealed. A boy, huh? What's he like? Gimme all the juicy details. Taken aback by Gunhead's random giddiness, it took Uraraka a moment to recover before continuing. He's a small guy. Like, really small. He's sweet and soft-spoken, always smiling and always wanting to help. He's been through a lot, and he tries hiding it, but I can tell he's still hurting from everything that happened. I mean, a year ago he lost his arm in an attack. No way he's recovered fully from that. Anyway, I really like him. And you dunno if he feels the same way? Gunhead asked. Oh, I'm not done yet, Ochako gave an exasperated giggle. On the side, I also have a crush on a girl in my school. An upperclassman who is legitimately the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Didn't really discover I had a crush on her until the festival. And then, after the festival I learned this upperclassman and the boy I like are seeing each other already. This got a bit of a girly gasp from Gunhead. Oh my, what a twist. Still a bit more, sir. Ochako took a breath before continuing. Last week I actually got into a conversation with the upperclassman where I admitted everything to her. Rather than get mad or weirded out, she actually offered for all of us to try a three-way relationship. I haven't answered yes or no yet, because I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, there's entire series of anime where an angry love triangle is the driving force behind the plot. I don't know if I want to try risking falling into one of those. After that was silence born from Uraraka's nervousness at talking about it and Gunhead thinking about it all. The other sidekicks were all chatting in their own groups, so Gunhead was the only other person in the room who knew her dilemma. That is quite the predicament, the pro-hero stated. I honestly dunno what the best option would be. Best you can do is maybe give it a shot. I mean, if it doesn't work out at least you'd know for certain, right? Or if you feel just too uncomfy you can also just back away next time you talk to her. Better to get your answer down sooner, you know. Yeah, Ochako admitted. Yeah, you're right. That's the spirit. Gunhead patted her shoulder. Now, rest for a few more minutes, then we get back to working your quirk. Monday and Tuesday were thankfully mostly calm days for Midoriya Izuku. After his villain fight Sunday afternoon, it had been decided he would stay indoors for the rest of his days with Madame Foster on the off chance that villain he fought, Overhaul, had subordinates who wanted revenge. Plus, he was the only person Eri would trust. He had to be present for anything medical done for her. On top of that, for the past couple days she had clung to Izuku's knife like a lifeline. The doctors were initially nervous about this, but the fact she hadn't even tried to draw it the entire time made them feel better. On Tuesday Izuku had helped Eri keep calm enough to talk about everything that happened to her while Overhaul had her. Izuku blanched at her words, and one of the doctors actually vomited. Hearing she was treated like a tool, hearing what that villain did to her time and again, Izuku could only hug her tight. He was wrong, Izuku cried as he hugged Eri. You're not CC cursed, you're not a monster. You're a sweet little girl who didn't deserve any of that. At those words, Eri herself began to cry and hugged Izuku tight. It was at that point her horns suddenly grew and began to glow. No. Eri gasped before pushing her way out of Izuku's hug. Don't touch me. Before anyone could ask anything, Eri's entire body began to glow and she cried louder than before. As she stepped back, she stumbled and accidentally touched an apple on a nearby table. Izuku watched as the apple shrank down and disappeared in a second. When she touched the metal table, however, nothing happened. That meant her quirk only affected organic matter. Which meant, maybe. Eri! Izuku shouted. She stared at him in abject terror as he reached out with his left hand. Take my hand. No, the girl screamed, tears running down her face. I don't want to make you disappear. You won't. Izuku shook his head. I won't disappear, I promise. He held out his hand again. Eri, still scared beyond belief, looked at Izuku's face. His face was one of worried determination, the same expression he wore when he rescued her from Chisaki. Eri, her quirk still going wild, closed her eyes. She didn't want Izuku to disappear. After a few moments, her eyes shot open as Izuku gently rubbed her cheek with his prosthetic hand, which had a red aura around it. I won't disappear, Izuku smiled, tears in his eyes. I'll always be here for you. I promise. These words brought more tears flowing from Eri as she sobbed and hugged his arm the same way she had been hugging his knife. The two kids stayed that way until Eri's quirk calmed down. Her horn shrank back down to its normal size, her glow dimmed down and she fell into Izuku's arms, tired from the exertion. After a few moments her sobs quieted until she fell asleep completely. Izuku gently lifted her up and carried her to bed after that. Madame Foster had witnessed the entire event, ready to have one of her sidekicks, one who had a calming quirk, step in. She was both amazed and impressed with how Izuku handled that, along with a fair amount of anger/worry at his recklessness. She'd have to give him a talking to about that later. For now, she'd leave the boy be. Shudo grit his teeth as he focused his flames. Over the past few days he had worked on streamlining both sides of his quirk. He still had a long way to go, but he was much better than before, now that he didn't even think of endeavor while using his quirk. Concentrate, Shinobu instructed while Ataru and Ayam sat a safe distance away. Fire is trickier to use than ice. Ice is solid, a firm foundation. Fire is wild and fluid, with no direction on its own. Become that direction. Don't be a stone pushing through flames. Be the wind that eases it where you want it to go. Shudo clenched his arm more, trying to bend the flames to his will. He wasn't trying to brute force it like his father had taught him. He slowly eased the flames out from his arm, but not blasting it out. Instead, he worked to slowly shroud his hand with it. He was sweating from the heat, and gave a groan as he fell to his feet, the flames going out completely. As he knelt there, he felt a familiar layer of ice form up his back and down his arm. He turned and nodded his thanks to Ayam, who simply smiled and nodded. "What were you trying there?" the female pro-hero asked as she knelt in front of Todoroki. "You were clearly trying to do something with your flames there." The student took a breath. "I was trying to shape it like I shape ice. I mean, if we can shape our ice into hammers, I was wondering if I could do the same with my fire." "Interesting idea," Shinobu smiled as she stood up. "However, a flawed one. You tried to make a hammer, right? That would never work with fire." She took a few steps back. "What can you do with fire?" "What?" "You heard me, Todoroki. What can man do with fire? How does he use it as a tool?" "It's used to cook," Shudo replied. "Used to burn. Used to brand and burn. Used to," he remembered something he saw in school. When he was getting his hero uniform adjusted, he saw one of the support students using a particular tool. "Fire is used to cut." "Exactly." Shinobu snapped her fingers. "Cutting torches. I know a few heroes in Korea and China who use their fire quirks like cutting torches because fire is a cutting power. You'd never be able to make a hammer from fire because hammers are hard and made for heavy impact. Try to think of a different tool instead." Shudo nodded and closed his eyes. Ayam had cooled him down enough it was safe to use his fire again, so he raised his arm and concentrated. He felt the flames grow from his arm as he thought of a tool. A weapon, really. After a minute of envisioning his idea, he heard a gasp from the two ice users and a chuckle from the fire hero in front of him. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Shudo finally opened his eyes and looked down at his arm. True to his idea and hopes, his flames were concentrated around his arm. Emerging a bit past his closed fist were flames that curved out, forming the distinct shape of an axe head. Even though he lost concentration and the weapon flickered away, Shudo couldn't help but smile. He had made his fire truly his, and he knew for a fact his father could never do what he just did. With a chuckle, he had one thought in mind. "Take that, you bastard. Peerless. Brilliant. Evil. Merciless." There were many adjectives to describe many villains, but only one villain who fit so many of them. One man who was so feared and dreaded that any heroes who knew of him kept his existence secret from society or risked sending the populace into a mad panic. To some people, he was known as Sensei. To others, he was known as All for One. To one particularly annoying vigilante 50 years back, he was known as Whitey McTidyface, but that was another story. During the Tuesday night of UA's experience week, this master of villains was contemplating what he had learned within the past month. He learned that UA's hero course had some promising students. He learned that Class 1C was something of a secret weapon, full of students just as strong as the hero course. What had his particular interest, however, was one Midoriya Izuku. While Tamura was running around trying to find villains to recruit, he had Kurogiri look int. The members of Class 1C, and initially thought little of the quirkless boy. After some intel retrieved by his spies, however, All for One learned how foolish he had been to ignore the boy long as he did. During the weeks leading up to the sports festival, All for One had learned this young man was the personal student of Nezu, one of the few heroes that truly made him uneasy. Not only that, but the boy had analytical skills above and beyond any quirk he had ever heard of. The villain had heard from his spies in different hero agencies about how this boy's analysis of the heroes had greatly improved their skills and gave them ideas of how to further their quirk's capabilities. Heroes he had considered non-threatening were now forces to be reckoned with, all because of this boy's help. It infuriated All for One. Yet at the same time, it intrigued him. He wanted to meet this boy. He wanted to poke around in his little head, and see all the boy knew. And take it. "Sir," a voice broke him from his thoughts. Turning his head, he felt the doctor approaching him. I have some news on the group you were interested in. From your tone, the villain rasped, I assume it's not good news. Sadly no. The doctor waited a few moments before explaining, the Shai Hasaikai are no more. Apparently their leader, Overhaul, was captured and wounded a few days ago. His closest subordinates attempted to break him out earlier today. However, that attempt ended in failure, and several of their members, including Overhaul himself, were killed. The rest were captured. Is that so? All for one groaned. Shame. I was hoping to learn how I could use them. Oh well. How comes the preparations for Tamira's little game tomorrow night? Wednesday was a thankfully calm day. The most exciting thing was from the fact it would be Izuku's first day with the second hero for his exam. There was a bit of hesitation due to Eri's circumstances, but it was decided that Izuku would keep bunking with Madame Foster and leave to do work. Due to the second hero primarily working during the night, while Eri slept, this arrangement was quite convenient. He was thinking about this until the hero he was with began speaking. What I do, pro-hero native explained, is usually along the lines of tracking and information gathering. My quirk lets me track a person's movements so long as I have a possession of theirs, so I can help with anything from finding missing persons to tracking escaped villains. Why, you're a pretty active T-type too, aren't you? Izuku asked. I've read about you, and even after learning about Type 2s and never guessed you were one. We're not all desk jockeys, Native laughed. I like being out there and spying on gangs and stuff. Come on, we can chat more while we walk. Izuku nodded and took a couple steps before they both heard a deep boom. Turning toward the noise, they noticed a smoke rising from a few blocks over. What the hell? Native asked before both his and Izuku's earpieces exploded with noise. Red alert, the hero comms blared. Large-scale villain attack on Wampa Street. All available heroes move to assist. You heard the man. Native yelled as he and Izuku ran down an alleyway. I want you to focus on assisting civilians in evacuating the area. I'm giving you authority to fight, but do not initiate combat. Izuku nodded and followed the pro-hero. This week was getting to be too exciting. At least the fighting was away from Eri this time. The two turned down another alley and kept running, Izuku keeping up easily. As he ran, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He knew this feeling. He started glancing around for what caused it, and was looking up when he saw a streak of red and light gleaming off metal. He gasped, knowing he didn't have time to say anything, and used his left arm to push Native out of the way before a sword slashed across his chest. Chapter end notes. Yeah, another scream. XD, I love throwing cliffhangers at you people. But yeah, next chapter is gonna be the Stain fight. I hope you like how things go. Also, the thing with Izuku's arm there concerning Eri's quirk, yeah, remember that. Till next time. Flames and Steel chapter notes. Howdy folks. Are you ready for the Stain fight? You get a Stain fight. See the end of the chapter for more notes. The city of Hosu was on fire. The violence had spread out from Wampa Street across several blocks. Heroes were doing their best to contain the devastation and evacuate civilians while water-based heroes and firefighters worked to contain the blaze, but it was an uphill battle. There had been countless injuries amidst the chaos, and even a few deaths when the attack began. Shigaraki was ecstatic. The villain watched the chaos from atop a water tank with Kurojairi. The villain was laughing at the chaos below, and his servant was thankful for it. Ever since the USJ fiasco, Shigaraki's demeanor had changed between enraged and depressed. After the conversation with Stain last week, he had leaned more towards enraged. Seeing him laugh like this brought relief to Kurojairi. Despite being an immoral, murderous psychopath with an addiction to video games, Kurojairi really cared about Shigaraki. This is wonderful. Shigaraki laughed, his arms stretched out. Watch all the little cowards run. Yes, the bartender nodded. Just remember not to exhaust yourself tonight. Sensei told us to make sure you don't stress that arm of yours so quickly. Yeah, Shigaraki growled, his previous joy overshadowed by anger at remembering what happened to his original right arm. Raising his new monstrous limb, he hissed, all the other arms were shit, but this one is perfect. Once I get that, I'll make all those brats pay. Native and Izuku both jumped back after the man with the sword landed in front of them. After he felt sword cut into his coat, Izuku ran his hand across his chest to make sure nothing was bleeding. He sighed with relief when his hand came back dry. He would definitely thank Night Eye for the lining of his coat later. Turning his attention back to the man who attacked him, Izuku gasped when he finally realized who it was. Hero Killer SS Stain. Izuku screamed as Native took up a fighting stance between the student and the serial killer. Scouter, retreat, the pro ordered. I'll handle this. And no, Izuku shook his head. He'll kill you, then stab me in the back. He did that with the Raja and J Jasmine hero duo last year. We should dash. Suddenly Stain was right in front of the pair and swinging his sword again. He missed Izuku, but cut Native's arm open. In the 3 seconds it took Izuku to smack the front pocket on his jacket, hitting the button on his distress beacon, the pro hero fell limp to the ground. Izuku saw Stain move in for the kill and made the split-second decision to whip out his taser fingers. Unfortunately, the crackling of electricity was heard by the murderer, who leaped away to avoid the prongs. Before Izuku could even try again, the electricity faded, signifying the power needed to recharge. Groaning, Izuku closed the taser in time to catch Stain's sword with his prosthetic. The killer looked mildly impressed at this before Izuku got an idea. Ga. Wa. Doi. Point. Stain verbalized as Izuku used his right hand to punch Stain's face repeatedly. Were the situation not life-threatening, Izuku might have laughed at the rather comical expressions the serial killer made with each punch to his nose. While his physical strength wasn't enough to do any lasting harm, it stunned the hero killer long enough for Izuku to release his sword and use his stronger prosthetic arm to punch Stain into a nearby dumpster. With the murderer temporarily incapacitated, Izuku grabbed Native off the ground and hustled fast as he could. If he could get out to the street, a more open space, he could call for more help. He heard Stain scream in anger and chase after him. Then a chrome blur ran past Izuku. Izuku heard Stain give a grunt of pain behind him. Looking back, the greenette gasped when he saw someone had kicked Stain back. No. Not just someone. Ida Tenya. What was he even, Stain? Ida screamed. I'm Ingenium. And I'm here to avenge my brother. Wait, revenge? That confused Izuku. He may not have interacted with Ida that often, especially over the week since the festival, but Ida never struck him as someone driven by revenge. That wasn't good. Heroes are not driven by revenge and power. Run away. Izuku shouted. He's a serial killer. Why you can't dash? I respectfully ask you be quiet, Midoriya. Ida yelled back as Stain got to his feet. This is my fight. He kicked at Stain again, who blocked his foot with his sword. Ida shot back before Stain could retaliate, but shot forward again to deliver another kick. I will stop you, hero killer. Heroes are not driven by the desire for fame or glory. Stain just laughed, dodged the kick and cut open Ida's leg. The student screamed in agony before Stain licked the blade. In an instant, Ida was limp on the ground. Another faker, the villain hissed. They're coming out younger these days, huh? Ida. Izuku screamed. Run away, Native said. You're the only one who can move. Leave us and run, Scouter. Faker, Stain growled as he held his sword over Ida's head, I will purge you from this world. Izuku's eyes teared up as he watched the sword raise. A real hero. Izuku grit his teeth. I am sorry. Saves everyone he can. The same instant Stain moved to impale Ida, there was a scream from down the alley. The villain turned to see Izuku screaming at him, his arm sword extended. Stain turned to block Izuku's sword as Izuku swung it, his eyes widening when Izuku sliced through his steel katana like styrofoam. The villain jumped back before Izuku could slash again. However, instead of slashing at Stain, Izuku took the opportunity to sheath his blade, grab Ida with his fake arm and drag him back down the alley. Laying him next to Native, Izuku rushed back at Stain before the serial killer could pursue him. Stain swung his sword, but was met by Izuku's polymer shield. You too, huh? Stain glared. You fighting me to avenge the fakers? Fighting you to make sure you don't kill them. Izuku shouted back. Moving his arm to knock Stain's sword away, Izuku pulled out his taser fingers to attempt another shock. Again, Stain heard it coming and moved away. Growling in frustration, Izuku switched back to his sword and took up a stance between Stain and the paralyzed heroes. I won't let you hurt any of them. Stain stared at Izuku for a few moments before laughing. Your eyes, the murderer laughed. Those aren't the eyes of a faker. You're a good one. Sorry for almost cutting you down. Just step aside and dash. Stain raised his sword to deflect Izuku's blade. The villain watched in awe as the edge of Izuku's sword carved a line off his own blade. What is that made of? Instead of answering, Izuku slashed at Stain's sword, cutting the blade off. The villain growled and drew his third sword while throwing one of his many knives at Izuku. The smaller boy dodged with ease and closed in again. He slashed, but this time Stain deflected it skillfully enough to avoid damaging his blade. Drawing another knife, Stain attempted to stab Izuku in the shoulder, not realizing how much of his arm was prosthetic until the knife bounced off. Izuku jumped back with a spin, slicing through the deflected knife. Izuku knew what to do. Mere blocks from where Izuku was fighting Stain, the fight against Shigaraki's Nomu raged on. On one side, there were heroes trying to keep the battle contained. On the other side of the street, other heroes and their sidekicks were working to help evacuate the remaining civilians in the area. Any more civvies in this building? One hero asked, pointing at a structure that Endeavor torched in an attempt to stop a Nomu. No, it's clear, another hero replied. I need help over here, though. Got a woman under some debris. The other hero rushed over to help lift the destroyed objects off the prone civilian. As they did this, however, a Nomu rushed past another hero to the distracted pair. They turned in time to see the monster raise its arms to smash them both, only to see a spiky ball plow into it instead. The beast was thrown back from the impact, and the ball uncurled and landed on the ground. Ha! Gorogoro Mamura laughed. This thing ain't nearly as strong as the one from USJ. You two keep working, I'll keep you covered. Before either of the heroes could reply, Gorogoro rushed the Nomu again, slamming his arm into the Nomu's chest. Even if he didn't hit it with the spiky side of his arm, Gorogoro struck the non-shock absorbent beast with enough force to send it sprawling again. He was beaten by one of these once before, he wouldn't be beaten again, especially when there were more lives on the line. Looking across the street, he saw Oyuniko raising a shield to protect a line of civilians from flying rubble. Looking up, he saw Kagero engaging a flying Nomu in midair combat, armed with what looked like a cavalry saber. He was quite curious where she got that, but knew he could ask later. Right now, it was time to be a hero. The exchanges of blades and blows between killer and student continued for a good minute or two, with Izuku focused on parrying Stain's attacks while trying to destroy as many blades as he could. From watching how Ida went down, Midoriya figured out Stain's quirk required he ingest a person's blood, which was why he carried so many cutting instruments. Any he destroyed limited his options further, though this also meant Izuku couldn't use his own assortment of knives. On top of that, Stain was strong. The overhauled guy Izuku fought before couldn't hold a candle against the hero killer, and said serial killer's quirk wasn't even directly offensive. Speaking of which, how did Stain even discover his quirk? Did he bite someone? Did he focus? Izuku could contemplate his quirk after he was at least bladeless. Midoriya. Ida screamed. Stay out of this and run. This is my fight. Kinda busy right now. Izuku screamed back as he parried another knife. Stain was definitely faster than anyone else he had fought. Honestly, as much as Izuku hated to admit it, it seemed like his small frame was one of the biggest factors in him dodging Stain's attacks. He was used to fighting pro heroes, who were all bigger than the green kid in front of him. Izuku was starting to get a bit winded, though. He would welcome any form of help right now. Such as Nihilus. Where was Nihilus? Izuku hit the distress button. Suddenly, Stain pressed an attack with his knife, causing Izuku to reflexively block the knife with his sword. Using this opportunity, Stain spun his katana around and stabbed Izuku through the thigh. The boy screamed in pain and shoved Stain's hand away before using his blade to cut the katana's blade off. On one hand, he prevented Stain from getting any of his blood. On the other, he now had a sword blade going through his leg. The adrenaline from the fighting stemmed the pain for now, but his leg was unsteady. Stain drew another blade and pressed the attack, forcing Izuku down. In a blur, the hero killer used a different knife to cut open Izuku's cheek. The student couldn't destroy the knife in time, and in a second Stain licked his blood off the knife. No. Izuku screamed as his body fell limp. You're a good one, Stain affirmed. Now lay there and be thankful you get to keep your life. As for the other two. Stain turned and walked toward the other paralyzed men. Izuku screamed in frustration, clenching a fist and, wait a minute. Stain moved above Ida again, his sword at the ready. Native yelled at him to stop, Ida just stared at the sword with tears in his eyes. With a bloodthirsty smile, he poised his sword to kōhei. Both Ida and Native stared incredulously as a brick seemed to appear out of nowhere and impact the side of Stain's head with sufficient force to push him away. Time seemed to slow as the brick fell from his face, landing on Ida's leg, earning an ow from the student, but sped back up as Stain turned to where the brick came from. Izuku had pushed himself into a sitting position against a wall and was gesturing with his prosthetic, which seemed unaffected by Stain's quirk. Ha! Izuku laughed. Eye in your face. This last comment had the intended effect of getting Stain mad enough to go after Izuku again, to which Izuku went, whoa. Digging his fingers into the asphalt, Izuku used his left arm to essentially catapult himself away before Stain could injure him again. The other two paralysis victims watched as Izuku soared through the air like a ragdoll before he grabbed onto a nearby fire escape with his left arm. He hung there as Stain growled, too annoyed to speak words, before rushing at Izuku. The Type 2 student glared and shook the ladder, causing it to slide down moments before Stain's blade struck where his head used to be. Izuku flopped to the ground, grunting in pain from the sword blade that was still in his leg before grabbing some loose gravel and throwing it at Stain. The high-speed pebbles impacted Stain like shotgun pellets, though Stain was quick enough to cover his eyes. In that moment of temporary blindness, Izuku catapulted himself away again. Stain moved his hand in time to see Izuku land close to one of the small dumpsters that dotted the alleyway. The villain growled in frustration and took a step towards the kid, only to see said kid grab the dumpster with his hand and practically throw it at him with how fast it rolled. Stain gasped in shock and jumped aside, narrowly dodging the high-speed hunk of metal. He landed, turned back to Izuku and promptly got another brick to his face. He shook his head to send the brick away and gave a battle cry before another brick hit his chin. Behind that dumpster was a small pile of bricks, giving Izuku and his superpowered left arm plenty of projectiles to use. The fight came to another standstill as Izuku threw brick after brick at the villain. Stain was making slow progress towards the floppy student, but had to keep focused on dodging or blocking the flying bricks. After a minute, Izuku ran out of bricks. Stain sneered and rushed at him, eager to finally and truly incapacitate the runt. When he was mere steps away, however, Izuku shot to his feet and grabbed Stain's sword hand. Stain's eyes widened in shock at just how soon Izuku was able to move again. He tried to pry himself free, but Izuku's prosthetic hand held him like a vice. He looked back at Izuku, who was giving a nervous chuckle. This confused the villain for a brief moment before he realized what was coming. No, Yogh. Do. Hey. Hey. Pwah. Izuku was unleashing another barrage of punches with his right hand. Between the bricks and the punches, Stain's face was definitely gonna be an unhealthy color later. After delivering another hard punch, Izuku took a quick second to draw one of his own knives and stab it into Stain's arm. The villain screamed and punched Izuku back. The small boy was jarred from the blow, but his left hand held true as he twisted Stain's wrist to make him drop his sword. Now that his foe was disarmed again, Izuku pulled out his finger tasers one more time. Grabbing Stain by the collar, Izuku gave a roar as he jabbed the prongs of his fingers into the serial killer's neck. Stain screamed in agony as electricity shot through his body, and out of it. Blue bolts arced out of Stain's body, coursing over Izuku's face and arms and causing light burns before the charge finally drained. Once the electrocution ended, Izuku released the villain. Stain's unconscious body fell to the ground, beaten and incapacitated. Izuku himself fell backwards, landing against the wall. He did it. Izuku's gaze stayed on Stain's limp form, just to make sure he actually did it. He chuckled, which slowly grew to a pained laugh. He beat the hero killer. He beat hero killer Stain. He, a quirkless runt, beat someone who killed or maimed dozens of pros. Not even after his fight on Sunday did he really think he'd do something like this before graduation. As his adrenaline finally wore out, the pain of his injuries finally hit him, and his laughter turned to groans of pain. He thought he heard Native and Ida say something, and he could vaguely see their blurry forms fussing over him with a bright light above them before he finally lost consciousness. Chapter end notes. Game over for the hero killer. How did you all like that fight? Was it epic? Please tell me what you think. I worked super hard on it. Also, how did you like the parts with Izuku punching Stain in the face repeatedly? I was inspired to do that by a certain animated short that involved a frozen Viking. XD. Next time in Type 2 Hero, we see the aftermath of the Hosu battle. The rise of one star, and the fall of another. Till next time. XD. Steel and Fame chapter notes. Technically still Thursday, but late enough that we can say this chapter's being released on Friday. Good way to start the weekend, huh? We see how Izuku is after the Stain fight, and see a few other things. Enjoy. Happy face. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Izuku took a breath as he regained consciousness. He was no longer lying on the cold, hard ground of the alleyway. Instead he was somewhere soft, warm, and there was something on his chest. He opened his eyes slowly to adjust to the brightness of the room. Looking around slowly, he saw that he was in a hospital room. To his right, Ida was sitting on a hospital bed reading a book. He hadn't noticed the greenette had woken up yet. Then Izuku looked at what was on his chest and smiled. Eri was laying on him. She was sleeping peacefully. She also had his knife with her, and was still holding it with one hand while her other hand held Izuku's own. Smiling, he gently reached up with his right hand and pet her head. Oh, you're awake, Ida observed. Izuku turned to look at him and nodded. The hero student closed his book, spun around so he was facing Izuku and bowed his head. I'm sorry for my behavior last night, Midoriya-kun. Native informed me of what you were trying, and my arrival forced you into harm's way. I was so blinded by anger I failed to see the bigger picture. In the end, you were greatly injured protecting both myself and native. You are a greater hero than I could ever be. Stop, Izuku stated. And no self-depreciation while I'm in the room. Why you were mad, I get it. Anger can make people do stupid stuff. But you're alive. I'll learn from this. And next time you see two people fleeing from a serial killer, don't yell at them. Yes, Ida admitted with shame. Native gave me quite the tongue lashing over my behavior last night. Izuku gave a hoarse chuckle. There has got to be a better way to say that. If you find one, let me know. The two boys started laughing, but stopped when the little girl on Izuku's chest began to stir. Izuku gestured for Ida to stay quiet as Eri's eyes slowly fluttered open. She slowly turned her head toward Izuku's, and he smiled down at her. Hey, Eri. How are you? Izuku asked. Eri responded with a surprised gasp before launching herself onto him, hugging his head tight. Izuku laughed and patted her back, trying to get her off his nose. Who is that girl, anyway? Ida asked. When some other heroes brought her in, I tried to protest but was swiftly told this was permitted. Is she your sister? Izuku shook his head. I rescued her from a villain on Sunday, he explained. Her circumstances had been less than nice. She trusts me. Turning his attention to Eri, he whispered, I'm sorry for worrying you, Eri. I'm safe now. Which is a very good thing. Both students and girl stopped and turned to the doorway as two people stepped inside. The first was Nihilus, a very welcome sight for Midoriya. The other person, though, was someone he didn't recognize. They were a woman of average height and slender build, with long curly pink hair and deep blue eyes. She wore a black jacket over red shorts. On her hip was a rapier with a rose motif, and on her chest pocket was an embroidered ring composed of blue flame. Closer inspection revealed this ring was somewhat glowing. Izuku's eyes widened. Why you're from the Ring of Fire, Izuku stated. The Pacific counterpart of the Atlantic Sea Circle. The woman quirked an eyebrow at his observation, and Nihilus chuckled. Told you was observant. More observant than you, the woman scoffed before turning back to Izuku. Yes, I'm from the Ring of Fire, and I'm just here to act as witness as Nihilus here gives you your final grade for your exam. Due to your injuries, it was decided your exam would conclude today. Exam? Ida asked. And you, Nihilus pointed to Ida, are not to utter a word of you here today, got it? Ida, startled by the sudden demand, only nodded before the draconic hero turned back to Izuku. Before I give you your final grade, I apologize for not jumping in last night. I was unaware of just who that man was, and assumed you had it handled. What the moron here is saying, the woman spoke up, is that he spent his time here working on other things rather than studying up on local villains, and thus didn't know you were fighting an S-class villain. About that, Izuku asked, hugging Eri close as the girl stared at the heroes. I hit the distress button before the fight started. Why didn't you come? At this, Nihilus reached into his vest and pulled out what looked like a transparent evidence bag. Inside was the device Nihilus had given Izuku at the start of the exam. However, Izuku was fairly certain it didn't have that huge gash through the middle of it last time he saw it. That opening slash, Nihilus explained, cut through the battery. I didn't receive the signal. Placing the device back in his vest, he pulled out a tablet, pressed a few buttons, and began reading aloud. Midoriya Izuku, your final assessment is as follows. Firstly, analysis. Your skills in that field were truly never in question. Apparently your journals, which I still have yet to get a chance to peruse, gave enough insight to your skills. On top of those, you clearly analyzed the situations both times you faced villains this week. True, I could not supervise the first one due to the walls, but the fact you won is testament enough. Judgment next. Some of the judges were going to give you some flack in this one until they saw your distress beacon had been destroyed, yet the button was clearly pressed. However, you really did lose some points when you were reckless while attempting to calm young Eri there when her quirk flared up. It could have rewound you out of existence if your arm didn't somehow block the emissions. Otherwise, you did excellently. Izuku was stunned at how glowing his report had been so far. There was no way he'd do so good throughout the entire thing, right? Next is combat, Nihilus continued. I was only able to supervise your fight last night, but you performed remarkably. There was little to no wasted movement and you used every resource you had. On top of that you could have ended the fight in an instant with a fatal blow, but aimed to capture him, which worked in your favor here. You've definitely been trained well. I would hate to face you. This made Izuku nervously chuckle. He really didn't relish the idea of fighting a pro-hero at all. Lastly is conduct, the draconic hero smiled. Before I go into detail on this one, there's one more thing I have to tell you now. Your distress beacon. It also has a microphone so we can record what you say. This way we get how you act even when I'm not around. And what I heard from you was heartening. You've displayed honesty, an unrivaled desire to help, and a level of empathy almost unheard of outside of folks with quirks. You impressed quite a few people. Nihilus went silent to let everything sink in. Izuku was still in awe at how good he had done. Nihilus gave a smile. You needed a score of 275 to pass, and you got a score of 385. Congratulations, Midoriya Izuku. You're the first year to pass this exam in close to a decade, and certainly the highest scoring. Izuku gasped, his eyes wide. He passed. He actually passed on his first try. He didn't even realize he was tearing up until Eri tried to wipe his eyes with the blanket. Izuku smiled and wiped his eyes. Thank you, Izuku stuttered. Oh, we're not done quite yet, Nihilus smirked. Izuku looked back up at him as the hero pulled a card from his vest and tossed it on Izuku's lap. We had to use a candid shot for it. The photo on your actual school ID seemed a bit morose. Confused, Izuku picked up the card and looked at it. It was a thick, plastic card that had a photo of him smiling on it, possibly taken during lunch. It listed his name, alias, and a license. Izuku had just been given an official provisional hero license. Wait, Izuku gasped. I was told wouldn't get 1 of these until young man, the woman giggled, you fought against 2 S-class villains over the course of 4 days. You fought them by yourself, and won. Both times you successfully protected others. You've earned this. You'll still be participating in the provisional exam later this year, Nihilus stated, but with this you can participate in actual heroic operations. It won't be easy, but I have no doubt you'll do well. Lastly, the woman stepped forward, handing Izuku a small black card with a phone number on it. Keep this. The Ring of Fire is officially inviting you into their ranks. If you accept, call this number once you obtain your professional license. She gave a wink as Eri slowly took the card, as Izuku was again too stunned to move. This was too much all at once. He was about to suffer a mental blue screen. As your exam is over, Nihilus explained, you'll be heading home once you're discharged. Your bags are packed and being held by one of Madame Foster's sidekicks. The situation with Eri will be discussed with your principal, since she is only comfortable around you. The doctors patched up your leg and cheek, but want to make sure everything's working before letting you go. He picked up the remote and turned on the television. My associate and I have some business to attend to, but trust me when I say you'll want to watch the news in 30 minutes. You were a fun student to watch, Midoriya. Take care. Both Nihilus and the Ring of Fire heroine bowed a bit before exiting the room. Izuku was still in stunned silence at what he had just been given. Well, Ida spoke up, that was something, Midoriya-kun. Why you're telling me, Izuku croaked. Looking down at Eri, he smiled and hugged her softly again. He didn't know what would happen to her now, but he hoped he'd get to stay in her life. He'd only known her a few days, but seeing her made him feel better about things. He wondered how Melissa would react to her. Or Uraraka. Or the rest of his classmates. Midoriya-kun. Oh. There was one of them right now. The room's occupants turned to the doorway, seeing Kagero Kiana standing there. She was wearing an all-white outfit that looked a bit like leather armor. She even had a cavalry saber on her hip. However, said outfit was also cut and torn in a few places, and she had bandages covering her arms. What shocked Izuku the worst, though, was that it looked like one of her signature braids had been cut off. It is you. Kagero gasped as she dashed into the room, causing Eri to hug Izuku tight. I had no idea you were even in town. Are you alright? Were you caught in the fighting? Who's the little girl? Slow down, please, Izuku stuttered while gently rubbing Eri's head. I am doing better, I was fighting a V-villain, and this is Eri. I rescued her on Sunday. He turned to whisper to Eri, say hello. She's safe. The little girl slowly looked at Kagero, who was wearing a big smile. Hello, Eri quietly greeted. Now that she was getting a better look at Kagero, Eri's eyes widened a bit. Are you an angel? Yeah, kinda. Kiana laughed. And look. We got the same hair, same eyes. I bet you're an angel too. Eri's eyes widened more at this. Izuku had been saying similar things any time she felt depressed, and now someone else said it. Maybe it was true. This made Eri feel good enough that she gave a small smile. Izuku gasped. He'd never seen Eri smile, no matter how small. Seeing her smile now just made him feel even more affection for her. "So," Kiana asked, "you rescued her from a villain?" "I myself am also curious about her circumstances," Ida stated. Their words snapped Izuku out of his stupor and he began regaling his friends with the tale of how he rescued the girl. When he started explaining what her quirk was, Eri got a little nervous but was placated with another hug from Izuku. After his story finished, Kiana and Ida began explaining themselves to Eri. Ida talked about how his older brother was a hero, Kiana talked about her own deeds the previous night. Their conversation was nice and casual until the TV began blaring the news. Izuku and Ida both remembered that Nihilus wanted them to watch the news, so they turned their attention to it. Hero News Network, Morning News. "Good morning," the gorilla-esque news anchor greeted. "This is Iwata Komodo with the mid-morning news. Reports of wounded and deceased from last night's villain attack are still pouring into the news station, although we're still uncertain of the identity and goal of the villains responsible for the attack. However, of more immediate fervor are two reports that came in earlier. Firstly, at approximately 5:33 this morning, pro-hero Endeavor was taken into police custody. A picture of the hero's mugshot appeared on the screen next to the newscaster as they continued. Initially, all information on the reasons for his arrest were kept from the public. However, just an hour ago we received the literal laundry list of crimes that the hero had committed during his time. Joining us this morning is Norishige Taken, also known as Pro-Hero Grand Moff, lead investigator of the Death Star Agency, the people who unveiled the discrimination scandal at Aldera Junior High. Glad to be here, the elderly pro-hero said as his image appeared on the screen, above the name bar listing Norishige Grand Moff Taken, along with his agency's name. Grand Moff, the anchor addressed, "It was your agency that brought forward the evidence proving his guilt, correct?" "Correct for the most part," the hero nodded. "We received tidbits of info in the past from slighted citizens, but around 2 weeks prior we got a huge cache of information from an unnamed yet official source. We got details on everything from spousal and child abuse, destruction of property and the loss of civilian life just to name a few. With this in hand, we obtained a warrant to search his house, verifying more of his heinous crimes." "The pro-hero did more?" the gorilla man asked. "Quite a bit. We managed to force open a vault in his bedroom that detailed his constant bribes to officials to ignore his destruction of property and civilian life, along with something most abhorrent. We found a marriage contract. A quirk marriage contract. Todoroki Enji literally bought his wife from her family as a eugenics project." "Ah yes, his wife," Iwata nodded. "We tried to find information on her, but came up with very little beyond her name, Todoroki Rei, and the fact she was admitted to a psych ward a decade ago. There was a bit of bribery there, too," Taken sighed. "Taking a look at his financial records and interrogating a few people, we discovered Endeavor had been bribing the doctors of that hospital to continuously declare his wife unfit so that she would be forced to stay there." "Why would he do such a thing with his own wife?" "Beyond being a horrible human being," the hero asked. "It is likely he did so because he knew that she would likely file for divorce upon release and try to take the children with her. It pains me to admit it, but in the long run that might have been better for her in that, with Endeavor's arrest, she is now the head of the family and can legally take everything from him in the divorce. Especially with all the evidence of his crimes. We had 2 of our own mental specialists give her a go-over, and she is expected to be released in a few days. In a bit more good news, the parents that sold her and the doctors that kept taking bribes are also facing jail time for their illicit acts. A rough thing to hear, especially after the battle last night. At least we do have some good news to counter that with." "Indeed you do," Taken laughed as Endeavor's image was replaced with a video. "For the citizens at home," Iwata explained, "the video you're seeing is taken from our news chopper last night. They were initially airborne to record the battle, but as you can see discovered a second fight going on in an alleyway literally blocks from the main battle. The faces of most of the people involved have been obscured to protect their identities, but you can clearly see a figure fighting the hero killer Stain. We've had to crop the video here for time, but we have the full fight on our website. As you can see, the unnamed individual fighting Stain actually won the battle, and the killer was taken into custody." At this, the video was replaced with Stain's mugshot for a bit, showing his bruised and beaten face before going back to a loop of the fight. "Quite the exciting fight, huh?" Taken smiled. "I've actually been given clearance by Principal Nedzu of UA to talk about the brave lad there, but understand I cannot impart his real name as he is still a student of UA. And I'm sorry to interrupt," Iwata waved his hand, "but did you say student? The person who fought and beat a serial killer is a student. That he is. As I said, I can't give his real name, but I can state that his current hero alias is Scouter. He was in Hosu for something largely unrelated to Stain, but was pulled into battle to protect the 2 paralyzed individuals. One of the people is another student, and thus obscured, but the other is pro-hero native, who was admitted to Hosu General Hospital after the fight. Did the student get in trouble for fighting? Admittedly, I'm not sure how much I like people getting in trouble for acting in self-defense, but there is no worries there, the hero shook his head. In a statement he made to the police, Native explained that he gave Scouter authorization to fight in self-defense. They were actually on their way to assist in a battle that started on Wampa Street before they were jumped by Stain. Is it safe to ask what the student's quirk is? The news anchor inquired. I understand if we can't, but I am curious about what quirk enabled this student to beat an S-class villain. It's perfectly safe to ask, Taken laughed, because he doesn't have a quirk to speak of. That student is a quirkless hero student. Quirkless. Is that so hard to believe? I mean, it should be obvious from the fight itself. He used no unusual abilities, relying solely on support gear. I am just stunned is all, Iwata recovered. To think, a quirkless student succeeded where so many quirked heroes failed. It's about time such a thing occurred, I'd say. I've had the privilege of knowing many quirkless people who were just as capable as quirked people. I mean, when I came on you mentioned how it was my agency that also revealed the Aldera scandal, remember? Well, the detective who spearheaded that investigation is a quirkless lady who had applied to other agencies but was rejected due to her quirkless status. Quirkless are no worse than anyone else on this planet. And Stain getting captured by one is one heck of a testament to that. Stain and one other, Taken grinned. We've also received reports from pro-heroine Madame Foster that this same young man fought and apprehended another S-class villain on Sunday. Names cannot be disclosed, but apparently this villain's capture will have quite the effect on the prevalence of trigger in our society. The future looks bright for the future pro-hero scouter. We're out of time, thank you for joining us. After the commercial break, we'll have an update on the aftermath of the battle last night, via an official police statement. This is Hero News Network. Chapter end notes. Well, that was a bit of a ride, huh? Izuku is just too awesome. XD and Eri gets more of the loving she deserves. And with how a few things didn't happen, how do you think it'll affect other things in the long run? Hope you like how things develop. Next time, we see how everyone else's weeks wind down, and the ending of next chapter will make you cry happy tears. Fame and Home chapter notes. Howdy do dear. Managed to pump this chapter out fast for everyone. A bit of another calming chapter after the Hosu battle. You will cry happy tears in here, trust me. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Ochako stared at her phone in utter shock Thursday afternoon. For the entire day, HNN had been going on about the villain attack on Hosu, the downfall of Endeavor, and the hero student who took down hero killer Stain. There was a lot to each of those stories, but Ochako was more focused on the last one. She might not have recognized the name, and the face had been pretty blurred out, but there was only one quirkless boy she knew who had a fake arm and a green mess of hair. Midoriya Izuku, the shy quirkless boy who was barely taller than her shoulder, fought a serial killer and won. She knew he was getting hero training. She knew he was a genius. Despite both of those, this fact made her speechless. In her eyes, his coolness factor skyrocketed from this. She was sure everyone else felt the same way, right? Her class chat had been exploding since the news had aired, but she hadn't checked it yet. Looking over to see Gunhead and his sidekicks staring gobsmacked at the television report, now seemed as good a time as any. Sitting down on a bench, she pulled up the chat and read what she missed. Rock Lobster, guys, have you seen the news yet? Discount Pikachu, yeah. That's Midoriya, right? Xena Queen, totally. I recognize that bush anywhere. Holy Ivy, not just Midoriya-kun either. The other student on the ground was definitely Ida-kun. Tired and chatty, well, damn. It really is. Holy Ivy, language. Tired and chatty, sorry. Discount Pikachu, yeah, Shinso, don't anger the missus. Tired and chatty, I will hypnotize you into a pink frilly tutu. Heart Rocker, anyone gotten word from Ida? He hasn't answered his phone all morning. You think he's alright? Kung Fu fighting, nothing on my end. What about you, Hagakure? Weren't you in Hosu too? Nope, I'm invisible, I was, but the hero I was with took me out of town that afternoon. We didn't get back until after the fighting ended. I am helping with cleanup though. Daedric Prince of Madness, Gita Tenya was wounded during the fight in Hosu. He is currently out of communications, and will be returning to Muzutafu once he is discharged from the hospital. I do recommend against swarming him, though. He is not in good graces right now. Principal Nedzu Discount Pikachu. Rock Lobster, that doesn't sound good at all. Heart Rocker, doesn't explain his lack of contact, though. Maybe he's still asleep. Discount Pikachu, okay, but how does the principal have access to our chat, and why is his username an Elder Scrolls reference? Uraraka gave a giggle at that last part. The principal might be an intimidating being, but her chats with Midoriya had shown her that he really did care for his students. Chances are he chose that sort of name to break the tension. Opting not to add anything to the conversation, she closed her phone and went back to stretching. As she did, she thought about Midoriya a bit more. Midoriya, and Melissa. Once she got home, she swore to give Melissa her answer, but she was still nervous. How would things work between the three of them? Would Izuku even want them all together? She could only hope that things would end well, one way or another. Friday morning dawned with overcast skies and chilly winds. Despite this, however, Izuku didn't feel gloomy at all. He was on a train heading back for Muzurifu. In the car with him were Ida, Kagero, Gorogoro and Oyaniko. They could have gone home sooner, but after seeing Izuku on the news they decided to head home together. They were spread out across the aisles around him, since the seat right next to him was taken by Eri. The small girl was looking out the window, clutching Izuku's knife close. She had never traveled by train before, so seeing the landscape go by so quickly was a marvel to her. Izuku himself had recovered from what happened over the past few days. His leg was healed, his cheek now sported a notable scar, and his brain had finally unfrazzled after learning he received official credit for taking down 2 S-rank villains. He was glad his name hadn't been released. His mom would get a literal heart attack if the media stormed their apartment. She might have won anyways just because he knows she saw the news report with his fight against Stain. Unfortunately, he couldn't even head directly home yet. He needed to talk to Nedzu concerning Eri's circumstances. Honestly, he was hoping she could stay with him and his mom, but he didn't know if she could. After another few minutes, the food trolley came rolling through. At this point everyone huddled together, bought what they wanted, and shared how their weeks went. Most everyone spoke about the highlights of their week, trying to focus more on what happened before the big battle. Oyaniko had apparently been helping with a hero whose agency was more like a for-hire security firm, while Gorogoro was with a more combative hero. Kagero Kiana had been helping with another hero who was impressed with her sword skills, hence how she got a saber for the Hosu battle. And why she still had that saber. On the train. Izuku couldn't help but wonder how she was allowed to bring that onto the train. Then again, it was probably the same reason why Eri had been allowed to carry the knife on board. Oh well. Something to worry about later. For now, he and Eri were riding home with their friends. At the same time Izuku and Eri were riding the train, Todoroki Shudo was packing his own bags alongside Moriboshi Im. The two were instructed to pack before meeting her aunt and uncle that morning, and Shudo was slightly worried. He was also a bit stressed over his lack of a phone. Tuesday morning he was practicing his fire with Shinobu, and she accidentally melted half of it. She agreed to cover him getting a new one, but this meant he had spent much of the week without any connection to the outside world. Endeavor was not gonna like that, but honestly at this point he didn't care. He got to spend a week with the girl he liked, and learned how to use his fire without brute-forcing it. He never would have thought this before, but Endeavor could suck it. As soon as he and Moriboshi were packed, the two students met up with the pro-heroes in the courtyard. The two heroes looked at the students with wide smiles, proud at how far the two had progressed over the week. While Shudo had been practicing with his fire and learning a small handful of Moriboshi-style ice techniques, Im had been working on her invincible ice and other tricks she had devised with the help of Midoriya. Both Uncle Frosty and Anyuji Shinobu were beyond impressed. "You done good, kids." Ataru smiled through his mask. "I'd say either one of you could handle any non-top 10 pro hero easily. I kind of wish we had more time." Shinobu nodded as she handed each student a ticket, "but sadly we could only reserve you for the week. Here are your tickets to get home." Todoroki read his ticket and, that was wrong. He reread the words on the ticket twice before turning back to the older heroes. These tickets aren't for the station we came from," he stated. "Nor are they for today." "Course not." Frosty smirked. Pointing over his shoulder to the gate behind him, he replied, "Your last test. The station those tickets are for town on that side of the mountain. Those tickets are for tomorrow morning. You have that long to make it down. Take care kids." With that, the pros both threw down gray balls that exploded into smoke. When it cleared, both the heroes were gone. There weren't even any footprints showing which way they could have gone. With some minor dread, the two students walked to the open gate and looked out. There was a clear path that seemed to stretch to the town in the distance, but if their climb-up was any indication. "This entire path is booby-trapped, isn't it?" Todoroki asked. "Most likely," Moriboshi nodded. "Don't step on the logs." "Yup." The two students sighed before moving their bags around to a comfortable position for the running they knew they were going to be doing. Both then dropped into the stretches they had done every morning, making sure they were limber and ready. Moriboshi eyed her partner as they did so, a sly idea forming in her head. As the student straightened up, Ayam grabbed Shudo's collar and pulled down a little bit. This made him lean just far enough for her to kiss him on the cheek. This sudden display of affection caused Todoroki to freeze in place and steam flowed from his ears. Moriboshi gave a giggle. "I'll give you a real one if you beat me to the bottom," the girl seductively whispered. Knowing this made Todoroki even more flustered, Moriboshi took the opportunity to shoot ahead of the hero student. What the dash, Todoroki quickly recovered, Ichiwai. No fair. The blushing hero student quickly ran out the gate to catch up with the laughing Ice Queen. And that's a wrap, the director called. Asano and Momo both gave sighs of relief, having held their arms up for this commercial for close to half an hour. Sakai gave a tui as he spat out the basket he'd been holding in his mouth. "If never bite another wood basket for the rest of my life," he groaned, "it will still be too soon." "Oh come on," Iwabumi giggled as she patted his cheek, "you did good. All of you did good." She gave a genuine smile at the 3 students who assisted her with this. "I'd say you've had a very successful week, huh?" "Yeah," Asano nodded. "Modeling is hard. Your political work is indeed quite a task," Momo acknowledged. "I now know that elm tastes different than juniper," Sakai deadpanned. Everyone stared at the snake for a few moments before breaking out laughing. Anyways, Iwabumi wiped her eyes after she finished laughing. "I know Yaoyorozu isn't really into modeling, but for you, Asano-chan." She handed the Gen Ed girl a card with a few numbers on it. "You were especially receptive to what we did this week. Once you graduate, call this number. I'll see if you still got it." The girl with the giant quirk smiled and nodded as she accepted the card. "The commercial should go up in a month. I'll make sure all 3 of you are credited." She gave a wink as the 2 girls and Snake bowed their heads graciously. Izuku gave a happy sigh as he heard the hard clacking of his shoes on UA's tiled floor. Before the train had stopped, Izuku had gotten a text from Nedzu requesting he bring Eri to him immediately. Apparently the principal wanted to get her living arrangements squared away soon as possible. No point in delaying the inevitable. Holding one of Eri's hands, Izuku gently led her through UA's silent halls. Holding Izuku's knife like a teddy bear, Eri looked around UA in complete awe. She had never been inside a building like this. It was clean like Overhaul's compound, but all the plants and noises made it feel so much more alive. It wasn't cold and empty. She liked it. After some time, the pair of kids made it to the principal's office. Izuku didn't even get the chance to knock before the door opened. As the 2 stepped inside, Izuku was surprised to see Midnight and his mother were already in the room. Midnight was clearly holding in a squee after seeing Eri, and Inko simply gave the girl a motherly smile. Nedzu nodded and gestured for the kids to sit on the chair between the 2 ladies. "Hello, Midoriya," Nedzu greeted. "I assume this is the girl." Izuku nodded and gently tugged on Eri's hand, giving her a nod. I am Eri," she whispered. "It is nice to meet you, Eri," Nedzu smiled. "Midoriya, I am afraid that I've only heard an abridged version of how you rescued her. Could you please tell us in greater detail?" Izuku nodded and explained it as he remembered it. Everything from Eri bumping into him, to his fight against Chisaki, earning a gasp from Inko, and how he managed to calm her down while her quirk went haywire. All the adults listened quietly until Izuku finished his tale. "You've certainly had quite the time, huh?" Midnight smiled, gently petting Eri's head. "Why yeah," Izuku stuttered. But what's gonna happen to Eri?" "About that," Nedzu smiled. "It's certainly for the best that she be with someone she can trust. Someone who can protect her, but keep her in close proximity with you, as you are the only person she trusts. Problem is, though, I am not certain any of the teachers here are up to the task. Most of them have their own families or are too busy with their own lives to handle another kid. The few who aren't, well, Mike is too loud for her, Hound Dog might scare her, and I don't trust Aizawa's fashion sense in the least. So, the only option. That's why I'm here," Inko smiled. "We were discussing the possibility of us taking her in ourselves, Izuku." It took almost half the day, but he and Moriboshi did make it to the town with minimal injury. As they still had time before the train, the 2 students had eaten a healthy lunch, explored the place, and gotten their feelings out in the open. Though Shudo would never admit he got to town after she did. Besides, she still rewarded him later. Moriboshi had gotten off the train before he did, so he was by himself as he walked the last few blocks to his house. He could have taken the bus, but after being on the train long as he wanted to stretch his legs. He knew his father would likely be mad at taking so long, but again, he really didn't care anymore. Plus, he knew it would only be a matter of time before endeavors past caught up with him. He hoped Fuyumi would be able to handle things after that. He walked in silent thought all the way to his house. Quietly opening the door and stepping inside, he immediately noticed several differences. The air in the house didn't seem so tense. Anytime his father was home the air felt suffocating, while his absence turned the air stale. Now, it felt warm and soft. And there was music. Endeavor would never let music play through the house, saying it was distracting. Especially this particular song. It was one of his mom's favorite songs. She would always play it when Endeavor wasn't around, and she would hum along with it. Like he was hearing right now. He stopped. It was impossible. He tiptoed through the house, carrying his bags and following the sound of the music and the humming. It was coming from the kitchen. Just like back then. He kept quiet as he approached, almost scared of what he'd find. He turned the corner and stopped at what he saw. She was there. His mom was there. She was there, wearing her old apron and cooking a late lunch. She hadn't noticed his arrival, humming to the music player she kept hidden behind the cupboards, only the device was openly sitting on the counter. It felt like a dream, an impossible hope that brought tears to his eyes. He stared for several minutes before his limp arms dropped his heavy bags. The noise startled his mother and she turned to him. She looked at him for a few seconds before giving a warm smile Shudo hadn't seen in years. "Welcome home, Shudo." Those 3 words broke the walls around Shudo's heart. Too overcome with emotion to articulate words, he just rushed forward and pulled his mother into a hug. She gave a gasp as he did so, feeling his warm tears soak into her shoulder. His arms were shaking, but he kept hugging her tight, too afraid she would disappear if she let go. After feeling this, Ray smiled and gently hugged her son. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "I'm here to stay." This got a sob out of Shudo, still not trusting his voice to make any words for how he felt. She was home. His mother was home. They were both home. Chapter end notes. Yeah, happy tears. Next chapter is gonna be the start of a new arc. Decisions are made, people talk, and a certain battle takes place. Tune in next time. Home and exchange chapter notes. For the first time in a week, Izuku gets a nice calm day, well, calmish. Stuff still happens, but nothing crazy, well, nothing too crazy. Also, I got a piece of semi-fan art / meme of type 2 hero and I squeal. XD https://sta.sh/015u774 ilc1m. It was thrown together by White Tiger 789, and I love it because it's so accurate. XD read on, folks. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Monday morning came too quick for Izuku's liking. After everything that happened the previous week, he wanted to spend another week sleeping. Stretching and groaning, he looked around his bedroom, resplendent in hero merchandise. The sun was just barely coming up, but he could smell his mother cooking breakfast in the kitchen. He tried sitting up, but felt a heavy weight on his right arm. He looked down, and smiled at the sight of sleeping Eri. Eri had been adjusting slowly to living with the Midoriyas. Inko had fussed over her scars and lack of knowledge about many things and had spent almost the entire first day shopping for Eri. She almost bought an extra bed before Eri said she liked sleeping next to Papa, a title that melted their hearts even more. Izuku was happy that Eri was getting to experience so many things, but was slightly nervous about what was coming next. "Eri," he gently shook her shoulder, "TT time to wake up." The girl woke up almost instantly, a leftover trait from her time with Overhaul. It too. Gave her a moment to remember where she was before looking at Izuku and giving a small smile. "Morning, Papa," she whispered. "Good morning," Izuku gently pet her head. "Are ready for today?" It took Eri a moment to remember what he meant before nervously curling up. They won't hurt me, will they?" she whispered. "Of course not," Izuku reassured. "My CC classmates are going to love you. You've already met a few, remember? The Angel, the spiky guy and the blue guy. Come on." He gently lifted Eri up into a sitting position. "Let's see what Mom made for breakfast, huh?" Eri hugged Izuku as he stood up from the bed and stepped out. As he did, his phone buzzed with a text. Grabbing it and checking it, he suddenly felt a bit of dread. Melissa was waiting in May's workshop, her phone in her hand. She was glaring at her screen, occasionally looking up at the door. Next to her, May was working on a piece of equipment that might have been easier to recognize before it was dropped in a vat of acid. After a bit, said inventor looked up at the clearly unhappy Melissa. "If you keep glaring like that," May joked, "you might develop laser eyes and melt your phone." "I told him to meet me here before school," Melissa growled. "And we still got, what, a quarter hour? Go easy on him, Mel. Dunno why you're so pissed, anyway." May turned her attention back to the possibly a boot and left the quirkless girl to steam. After another few minutes, there was gentle knocking on the door. With a call from May, it opened up and revealed a sight that Melissa honestly found completely adorable. Izuku was standing there in his uniform, and holding his hand was Eri wearing a miniature UA uniform, while also holding his knife. Melissa had been briefed on the girl earlier, so she held her tongue as the pair slowly entered the workshop. Izuku was, understandably, nervous and the little girl was looking around in wide-eyed wonder. When Eri looked at Melissa, the older girl gave a quick smile before scowling at Izuku. Hello, Melissa, Izuku stuttered. Instead of greeting him, Melissa turned to Mei. Hatsum-san, could you show young Eri around the workshop, she asked with an irritated tone. I need to speak to Midoriya-kun in private. Oh, sure, Mei replied as she stopped working on the Mabia helmet. Eri was nervous about leaving, but a quick word from Izuku and the little girl was holding Hatsum's hand as the inventor led her deeper into the workshop. After a moment Melissa and Izuku were alone, the taller girl glaring down at the shorter boy. Is something wrong, Melissa? Izuku nervously asked. Is something wrong? Melissa repeated before groaning. How about going toe-to-toe with a freaking serial killer? Melissa stomped forward and grabbed Izuku's shoulders before leaning down to eye level. What were you thinking, Midoriya? You could have died. I know you're training to be a hero, but you aren't one yet. He was an experienced killer, you're a student. I thought you were smarter than that, Midoriya. Why didn't you? She stopped shouting at him when she saw Izuku was tearing up. It tried to run, Izuku cried, BB but Itakake-kun rushed in and, an. Melissa's anger immediately evaporated and she pulled Izuku into a tight hug. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears in her own eyes. I was just so worried, Midoriya-kun. There's much I still want to do with you, I got scared. I saw the fight live, and each time he attacked you, I couldn't help but fear that would be the hit that killed you. She looked down at Izuku, speaking quietly. Please tell me you'll be careful next time, okay? Izuku nodded, his face down and still tearing up from Melissa's outburst. Then Melissa gave an apologetic smile, gently lifted his chin and chew. A kiss. Melissa was kissing Izuku. On the lips. It took Izuku a good few seconds to realize what was happening, and he felt his knees turn to jelly. Melissa's hug was literally the only thing keeping him from falling to the ground as Melissa held the kiss. After a period of time that simultaneously felt like a few seconds in eternity, Melissa moved away, still giving a smile. She gave a giggle when she saw just how red Izuku had turned. I was wanting to do that one for a while, the blonde whispered. Seriously? Mei deadpanned, startling both the other teens. Melissa straightened up and let go of Izuku, who nearly fell over before catching himself. Both of them turned to Mei, seeing her glowering at them while carrying Eri on her hip. Eri, meanwhile, was holding a random device and staring at the two older teens. How long were you standing there? Melissa asked. Long enough to feel the need to tell you Power Loader doesn't like students making out in his workshops, Mei bluntly replied. Especially in front of little girls holding experimental microparticle accelerators. As she said this, the device in Eri's hands made a pew sound and fired a line of blue light through the nearby window, leaving a small hole in the glass. Wow, Eri whispered in awe of the device. Anyway, it's almost time for school, so Mito-chan had better take his kid back and rush to class. Drop by later today, though, Mito-chan. Want to talk about some possible upgrades for your arm? Mei set Eri down, relieving her of the miniature device before the little girl ran back to Izuku. Her impacting his side in a hug shook him from his stupor. He quickly stuttered his apology and hustled out the door with Eri. Before the door fully closed, though, Melissa heard Eri ask one question. Was that pretty lady mommy? Now it was Melissa's turn to feel a bit flustered. The thought of having a child was, not unappealing, at least. Her train of thought was derailed when Hatsum roared with laughter. She must have heard the question, too. Oh boy, Melissa and Izuku were never gonna live that down. Thankfully, Melissa's phone started ringing, giving her a reason to exit the workshop. Checking the ID, the American girl answered. Hey, Uraraka-san. What's up? I want to try. Try what? Melissa teased, recovering from her fluster quickly. I want to try us, the three of us, that offer's still open, right? Maybe, Melissa hummed. I still need to talk to Midoriya-kun about it, but I'm sure I can convince him. I'll tell you later today, okay? With an affirmation from the nervous Ochako, Melissa hung up the phone and rushed to her own class. With all the emotions from earlier, she forgot to bring up a certain something to Izuku, and would strive to do so during lunch. Uraraka sat in homeroom waiting for Aizawa to roll in. She was still nervous over Melissa's words, but this was overshadowed by the overall mood of the class. The vast majority were abuzz with Midoriya's accomplishments. Todoroki seemed unaware of what Izuku had accomplished, and was startled when he heard the news. When asked about how things were with his father in prison, Shudo just said he needed to thank someone later. Ida, however, was most subdued. Several people had asked him about the Stain fight, but he refrained from answering. His head stayed bowed, and he seemed ashamed for some reason. She could tell he was feeling especially bad because he hadn't done his robot chop the entire morning. Hopefully he would recover soon. Settle down, Aizawa announced as he stepped in. Before he reached the podium, everyone had gone silent and were in their chairs. The teacher looked the class over before saying, I finished reading through your reports from your experience weeks. For most of you, I'll admit I'm not disappointed. Uraraka noticed Ida bow his head even more at these words. Don't think this means you can relax, however. 6 weeks from now will be the midterm exams. There'll be both a written and practical portion, and neither will be easy. You'll receive more details during your heroics class today. The principal requested I use this time to go over something else of importance. The class was paying rapt attention, curious what could derail the exams. 2 weeks from now, Eraserhead explained, is the I-Island Expo, and the hero course classes are allowed to attend. The class exploded with excitement. They all knew about the expo, and I-Island was nothing to laugh at either. Aizawa had to use his quirk to get everyone to calm down before continuing. The expo will last 2 days, and the following Monday will be a day off to allow all attendees to recover from jet lag. Uraraka, Todoroki, both of you have received official invitations due to placing during the sports festival. You will each be allowed to bring a single guest with you. Everyone else will have to pay a small fee for entry for yourselves, but UA will handle all other expenses. However, I will point out there will be a test this Thursday, and anyone who fails it won't be allowed to attend. A few of Uraraka's classmates winced at that. Also, their teacher continued, due to reasons I don't feel like explaining and you shouldn't ask about, Ida will not be allowed to attend the expo. There was a gasp from most of the class at this, and the mentioned student tensed up. Why was he being punished? Did it have to do with Stain? The tall brunette really wanted to ask now, and she knew a lot of her class was the same. I can hear the gears in your heads grinding together, Aizawa groaned. Like I said, I don't feel like explaining it, Ida is prohibited from talking about it, and if I hear about any of you asking about it I will make sure you get detention over that weekend. This shut the class up quickly, though a few of them still glanced in Ida's direction. As a last announcement, you've all no doubt figured out who Scouter is from the news last week. The principal himself requests you do not swarm Midoriya with questions. If you happen to see him today, try not to pry, and do not startle the little girl with him. Little girl? Shiozaki whispered behind Uraraka. It's not my place to explain, you'll have to ask him. That is all. With that, Aizawa slipped into his sleeping bag and dozed for the rest of homeroom. None of the students said anything after that, too busy trying to process everything they had just heard. Uraraka felt even more distracted now. Why couldn't things be calm for more than a week? Around the same time Aizawa was stepping into the 1A classroom, Izuku and Eri rushed over to class 1C. He knew they were the last ones to arrive, but this was planned. He had arranged this with Midnight, who was standing outside the classroom as Izuku dashed up. The pro-heroine had visited over the weekend, so Eri was thankfully growing used to her presence. This was displayed when Midnight smiled and gently ruffled Eri's hair. You ready? She asked. Izuku nodded, and Eri mirrored his action. Smiling at Eri, Midnight turned and opened the door. Settle down, class. Izuku could hear his classmates shuffle to their seats. Midnight cleared her throat. Before anyone says anything, yes, Midoriya-kun is present, he's just not here yet due to reasons. Yes, I know you figured out he's the Scouter from the news, but you shouldn't pester him over what happened. Anyway, I've gone over your experience week reports. For those of you who did heroic acts this week, impressive. For those who chose more domestic acts, still a good job. No matter what you chose to do over the week, you made our school and society proud. As for morning announcements. She turned to Izuku and nodded. The student slowly stepped into the room, his nervous daughter clinging to his arm and holding his knife like a teddy bear with her free arm. Most of the class was completely surprised by Izuku's little companion, but a few, such as Kiana, were less surprised. After the initial shock wore off, Midnight continued, this young lady is Eri-chan. Midoriya-kun rescued her from a villain on his first day of the experience week. She's suffered incredible trauma, and as such Midoriya-kun is pretty much the only person she really trusts right now. He's taken over as her official guardian until further notice. So I must ask you refrain from swarming either of them, as Eri-chan doesn't have full control over her quirk yet, and we don't want any accidents. She gestured for the two to take their seat. Izuku quickly hustled to his desk and pulled Eri onto his lap. Midnight smiled at the sight before continuing the morning announcements. In 6 weeks' time is gonna be the midterm finals, the R-rated heroine stated. It won't be easy by any standards, so study up. Also, the principal has requested to speak to a few of you during lunch today. He has a twist in mind concerning us and the heroics classes. I'm not allowed to say what it is, but, she licked her lips, I'm excited for it, and the participants will be, too. Also, the I-Island Expo is in a couple weeks. Normally only the hero classes receive school assistance in attending, but due to the fact you guys are all so awesome the principal has decided to extend that courtesy to our class as well. You'll have to pay a small fee for single tickets, but the school will handle all other expenses. This got the class excited. None of them had the opportunity to go to something like that before. Izuku himself was looking forward to it. Maybe he could try to get tickets for his mom and Eri, too. Judging from how wide-eyed Eri was in May's shop, she'd probably go bonkers at all the inventions over there, and his mom would likely enjoy the change of scenery. Yeah, sounded like a plan. The rest of the class periods before lunch passed thankfully calm. No one in class pestered Izuku about his fight against Stain, and Eri slowly came out of her shell as the hours passed. Everyone in class took a short turn with her, either letting her sit on their laps or simply scooting next to Izuku's desk as she drew crayon pictures of everyone. To everyone's surprise, she seemed to enjoy Sakai's company the most, constantly petting the snake when he got close. Okay, but seriously, Yoshida asked towards the end of English class, what do you guys think the principal is? A mammal? Choji laughed. I mean what kind, you furball, the purple-haired boy asked. He looks like a rat, right? I thought he was more like a mouse, Moriboshi replied. Maybe a ferret? Asano shrugged. I always thought he was a koala, Hojo piped up. Everyone turned to her in confusion, and she shrugged at them. I mean, he has 2 thumbs, right? Before anyone could answer, the lunch bell rang. Moriboshi grabbed her bag and dashed for the door. She was one of the 1C kids the principal wanted to talk to, and she wanted to get it out of the way fast as possible. The moment she opened the door, however, she came face to face with Todoroki. Only her sharp reflexes prevented her from bumping into him. The rest of her class watched, wondering what was going on. Oh, hey, Todoroki-kun, she greeted the slightly taller hero student. Did you As she was asking her question, Shudo pulled her into a tight hug, burying his face in her shoulder. There were a few gasps from her classmates, Midnight gave a fangirly squeal, and Sakai's jaw unhinged from shock. Moriboshi herself was unsure of what to do. Todoroki never seemed like the one for PDA, especially so brazenly like you got her back, Shudo whispered as Moriboshi's shoulder felt a bit damp. You brought my mother back. I can't thank you enough. Ah. That's what this was. Moriboshi slowly hugged back. We can continue this later, alright, she whispered back. The principal needs to see me about something. Todoroki nodded and let go, moving aside so she could leave the room. Before leaving completely, though, she turned back into the class. I'd prefer if you told no one of what you saw. Thankfully, everyone in class gave their agreement. No need to talk about something that didn't concern them, after all. After that, Moriboshi and a handful of other students made the walk up to Nedzu's office. Extra tickets? Nedzu asked with a chuckle. Why yes, Izuku asked, F for my mom and Eri here. The two were in the office by themselves, close to the end of the day. Eri was sitting on Izuku's lap, still holding his knife. I am willing to do whatever I need to earn them. I don't have much money on hand, but at this last remark, Nedzu started laughing. Izuku got a bit worried. Why was he laughing? Midoriya, the mammal chuckled, did you forget that you took down 2 villains last week? What does that have to do with you might desire to be a hero for the purest of reasons, Nedzu continued, but you must remember that what you're aiming for is indeed a profession. Hence the title, Professional Hero. Said individuals receive a government-paid salary along with small payments for every villain they capture. I opened an account for you a while ago with the intent of throwing some money in to help you get started, but you really don't need that boost now. Izuku stared in shock as Nedzu typed away on his laptop, continuing his cheerful explanation. After all, you took down 2 S-class villains by yourself, and Stain himself actually had a government-set bounty for his capture. Normally such earnings are taxed and divided among the hero and sidekicks, along with put forward to maintain the agency, but none of that applies to you as you're still a minor and worked on your own. Your mother has access to this account, which is also why taking care of young Eri there hasn't been a problem financially. With that, he spun his laptop around so Izuku could see the exact balance in his hero account. Izuku stared, then blinked and leaned closer. That's a lot of. He stuttered, not believing what he was seeing. Eri stared in confusion, still too young to fully realize what this meant. You earned it, Nedzu smiled. So you can see, getting extra tickets will not be an issue for you at all. The principal slid from his chair and walked around his desk. Could Eri come with me for something real quick? There's someone who wishes to speak to you in private. Izuku jerked at the word. How do you think it'll go? There's some more stuff going on too, but I know a lot of you were waiting for this. Read on. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Things were a hustle and bustle in Hatsume's workshop. Mei was showing Eri how to assemble, something that was hopefully non-explosive, while Nezu and Melissa were talking casually. School had ended earlier, but no one in the room had anything better to do, so hanging in the workshop wasn't a detriment to anyone. Melissa was curious. Why Nezu and Eri were here without Midoriya, though? She resolved to ask about it later. Suddenly the doors burst open, surprising everyone when Izuku staggered in. He was uncomfortably pale, sweating a flood and breathing heavily. It was clear he was on the verge of a panic attack. The instant they saw Izuku like this, everyone reacted. Eri gasped, worried about her papa, while Melissa ran up and pulled Izuku into a hug before gently pulling him towards a bench that Mei and Nezu had hastily cleared off. What happened, Midoriya? Nezu asked worriedly. Last I saw you were Izuku tried to speak, but his stutter combined with his oncoming anxiety attack reduced his words to gibberish and rough coughing. Easy, Melissa said as she rubbed Izuku's back. Go slowly and tell us I punched All Might in the face. Silence. What? There was an awkward silence in the principal's office. In one chair sat Midoriya Izuku. Across from him was All Might in his true, withered form. Neither of them had said a word since All Might sat down a few minutes ago. Izuku fidgeted in his seat, unsure what was even going on. The pro-hero finally spoke up. Crap, this went a lot easier in my head. Izuku just kept watching silently as All Might worked to gather himself before looking at Izuku with a regretful expression. Young Midoriya, I'm sorry. This startled the student even more. He was sorry. Was he sorry for, back then? I was wrong, All Might continued. When I saw you on the roof, I just saw a quirkless child and nothing more. I didn't even consider your intellect, any skills you may have possessed, and just focused on how you lacked any powers. Because of that, I was blind to what you were truly capable of. Izuku started. I really All Might raised his hand, politely asking Izuku to wait. There is more, young Midoriya. I watched you rush in to save that other boy, saw your heroic spirit, and still wrote you off simply because you were quirkless. I had the opportunity to make you great, and threw it aside, too hooked on that one factor. When I first heard you made it into UA, even though it was general education, I couldn't believe my ears. I think that's when I began to realize I was wrong about you. He chuckled. Also kind of helped that Midnight was literally beating me over the head when she explained what happened. Was that the day of the media break-in? Izuku asked. All Might nodded before continuing. That was also the day I began taking efforts to avoid you. Izuku coughed at that. All Might had been avoiding him. He guessed that explained why the hero had been absent any time he was with a hero course class. And why he never saw All Might once in the halls. Ever. Wow, the #1 hero of Japan had really been avoiding him, huh? That legit hurt. I was avoiding you, All Might sighed, because I didn't want to face my shame. My shame in what happened to you, my shame in how I treated you. My shame, in how I used to be. Izuku gave a confused expression. Young Midoriya, I was a late bloomer. A very late bloomer. As in, I was 14 when my quirk first manifested. I had lived my entire life up to that point thinking I was quirkless. After I manifested it, I never looked back. Seeing you here in UA, and hearing how you were Nezu's and Naitai's student, made me realize that I was so ashamed of my prior quirklessness that I had done everything I could to ignore it. Somehow, that even extended to believing in the capabilities of quirkless people. People like you. People like Melissa. Izuku thought, his chest feeling heavy and his fists clenching on his knees. After hearing what you did in the USJ, the hero continued, I really began to think of my prior behavior towards you. You worked hard and managed to save some hero students. After the sports festival, I had a conversation with one of your classmates, young Moriboshi, and she explained in explicit detail just how my perception of society was screwed up. Then the Saturday you went for your experience week, I had one more conversation that really opened my eyes to what was wrong with me. Through my actions, I had made you assume I thought quirkless meant worthless. And after that, hearing you skillfully apprehend two S-class villains. He buried his face in his hands, clearly trying to hide tears. Ever since you saved that young man last year, you've been proving my words wrong. Quirkless people can be heroes. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. I'm sorry I told you no without even giving you the chance. I am so sorry. Izuku sat, silently processing what he just heard. All Might really felt that way. He had done all this, out of shame. Rather than try to make things better for Quirkless, he just pushed them aside. Ignored their plight because it wasn't his problem anymore. That made Izuku feel something he very rarely felt. All Might, Izuku asked as he got to his feet, "See, could you please stand up?" The hero looked at him confused before slowly standing up. "See, could you bulk up real quick?" "Oh okay," All Might replied as he turned to his hero form. "May I ask why am?" While All Might was asking his question, Izuku jumped into the air and decked All Might in the face with his prosthetic arm. It might not have been as strong as some of the attacks he had taken in the past, but it still had a fair amount of force behind it. Then again, if it weren't for you, I might not be here. All Might had the decency to look sullen as Izuku finished with, I do forgive you, but only this time. After that, Izuku dashed from the office, leaving All Might alone. Izuku was laying on the bench in Mei's workshop. Melissa had laid his head on her lap and she pet him gently as he regaled what happened between him and All Might. Eri was sitting on the floor holding his hand, a rare moment where she wasn't holding her knife, while Mei and Nezu sat in nearby stools. Izuku had left out the parts involving his transformation, but even then the panic was too much for him. I punched him, the panicking boy whimpered. I punched All Might. I just lost CC control after he told me he was a late bloomer and... Izuku curled up a bit. He was like us, Melissa. He knew what we went through, what I went through, but chose not to do anything. Melissa was herself in a mental storm. Uncle Might, no, All Might had never told her he was a late bloomer. Hearing that, and hearing what he did after his quirk manifested, it filled her with rage. He was in a position to change things but didn't. Maybe she was in better conditions being American, but knowing he could have helped Izuku and didn't, what sort of person was he? On the other hand, she really wanted to kiss Izuku for defending her honor the way he did. She felt no qualms over him punching All Might, but it did hurt knowing that he still idolized the man so much that doing the deed almost sent him into a panic attack. She would definitely have to comfort him more later. And damn it, with this most recent incident she still couldn't mention the situation with Uraraka yet. She wanted Izuku to be in a good state of mind. Maybe later this evening. Well, Nezu spoke up, I feel I must apologize, young Midoriya. Had I known a conversation with All Might would turn out like this, I would have remained in the room, or at least warned you ahead of time. I'll call your mom and let her know you'll be a bit late. Tell her I'll be coming over, too, Melissa piped up. And there may be another guest. Nezu nodded as Eri looked around the room. Where's Auntie Mei? All Might groaned as he walked down the hall in his withered state. His cheek still hurt from where Midoriya had punched him. Just how strong was that prosthetic? It would definitely leave a bruise. However, the pain on his face was nothing compared to the pain in his heart. Midoriya Izuku was a changed lad. When he met All Might a year ago, the young man was wide-eyed with awe and wonder. The student he met in the principal's office, there was still some of that child in there, but it was buried under pain and regret and experience that no child should have. He knew for a fact that the Midoriya of a year ago would never have done what happened today. All Might passed a window, checking his reflection, and sighed. He really did screw up, huh? Hey Blondie, a shrill voice roared from behind him. The skinny man froze for a few seconds before turning. Storming down the hall was a girl he recognized from the support course. Mei, was it? Whatever her name was, it didn't seem as immediately important as the furious expression on her face and the very large gun in her hands. See, can I help you? The hero stuttered. You seen All Might anywhere? The student glared. He had a disagreement with a close friend of mine, and I just want to clear things up with him. All Might didn't really want to know what sort of clearing things up required an anti-tank cannon, so he denied knowing anything and watched the student storm away before rushing in the opposite direction. Maybe he could hide in his apartment for a few days until it was safe to return. Uraraka quietly hummed a song as she walked down the street that evening. She had gotten a call from Melissa earlier, asking her to meet Melissa and Izuku at the boys' apartment. She was a teensy bit nervous, but the hero student was eager to know what Izuku thought of Melissa's idea. She hoped the boy was willing to try with the three of them together. She knew she was. Reaching the apartment complex, Ochako looked around to make sure she was alone before using her quirks to jump up to the third floor. Straightening up her clothes, she walked to the door Melissa described and gave a gentle knock. She waited a few moments before the door opened, revealing a short, somewhat plump woman with green hair and eyes. Definitely Midoriya's mother. The woman gave a bit of a gasp as she looked up at Uraraka, then gave a warm smile. You look shorter on the television, the woman giggled. Come in, come in. Uraraka bowed her head as she stepped inside, immediately smelling something delicious from the kitchen. She heard some voices from the living room further in. Melissa told me what you're here for, Inko smiled. I'm not sure how it would work, but I'm just glad Izuku is, well, sought after. Uraraka blushed and tried to stammer a reply before Inko giggled and gently pushed her down the hall. As she got closer, she could identify Melissa's voice along with a younger girl. That must be the little girl Aizawa mentioned earlier. She didn't get the chance to talk to Izuku during the school day, so this was gonna be the first time seeing her. The hero student turned the corner and saw Melissa sitting on the couch, and next to her was Eri with her ever-present knife, which confused Uraraka. What got her concern was the fact Izuku was laying on the couch, his head on Melissa's lap as she gently pet his green locks. He appeared to be napping. Melissa saw her and gently waved her over. Is something wrong? Uraraka whispered as she came over. Eri scooted closer to Melissa, nervous around the new girl. He had a rough afternoon, Melissa stated. This is Eri. Be calm around her. Izuku rescued her from a villain during his experience week. Eri shyly waved, and Uraraka waved back as she sat on the floor in front of Izuku. Have you told him yet? Nope, Melissa sighed. That's why you're here, so we can see if it's doable. Izuku suddenly groaned, getting everyone's attention. He slowly opened his eyes, seeing Uraraka in front of him. He stared for a bit before his eyes widened and he shot straight up. You Uraraka SS-san, he exclaimed. What are you something we need to talk about, Melissa pet his head while pulling Eri onto her lap. She's gonna be having dinner with us tonight, but first. She gestured to Uraraka to say her piece. Well. The hero student nervously started. Thing is, Midoriya-kun, I like you. A lot. The still kinda asleep Izuku stared in a bit of a daze as the tall girl continued, it doesn't end there. I like you a lot, and I like Melissa a lot, too. That one woke Izuku up all the way, bringing a confused blush to his face. On top of that, Melissa spoke up with Eri on her lap, I think we both agree she's a lovely girl, right? Melissa smirked as Izuku blushed even more. I know you think she's pretty, too. So, here's my suggestion. How about all three of us get together? I'm willing to give it a shot if you are, and so is she. The two teen girls looked at Izuku expectantly as the flustered boy tried to get his brain working enough to get words. Aren't their entire anime with this sorta thing as a plot, the boy asked. Plot DD driven by D-drama and no drama, Melissa smiled, gently taking Izuku's hand. After a few seconds, Uraraka gently took his other hand. Please, the girl asked. Izuku was silent again, not quite sure how to answer, before Eri shuffled across Melissa's lap and tapped his shoulder. With his daughter nearby, Izuku broke from his stupor and looked into her wide red eyes. Does this mean I'm gonna have two mamas? All three of the teens stared at the little girl after hearing her question. Izuku was the first to recover, for once, giving a slight chuckle before looking between Melissa and Uraraka, and nodding. I am willing to give it a try. Melissa gave a joyful sound as she pulled Izuku into a hug, swiftly joined by Uraraka, sandwiching Eri between the three of them. From the kitchen, Inko was quietly giggling into her hand. Things were looking up now, Izuku's prior stress forgotten in all the affection. And now Uraraka was nervous again. The afternoon after she had dinner with the Midoriyas, gods that was delicious, she and Class 1A were assembled on the field they had their assessment tests. Standing in front of them were all the teachers, save All Might and Netsu. No one in class had any idea why they were all out here, and the suspense was killing them. Sorry I'm late. Netsu shouted as he rushed up from behind the teachers. Climbing up Vlad King's shoulder, the principal got comfy and smiled at the students. Sorry for the wait. We were going to tell you about this yesterday, but due to circumstances I was distracted, so we had to postpone this to today. Now, I believe you students all have an idea on what awaits you in the practical portion of the midterm finals. I heard we were going to be fighting robots. Kaminari asked. Close. Netsu laughed. You see, due to the exemplary behavior of most of you, combined with a desire to help you get ready for real work sooner, we decided to change things up a bit. Your opponents for the finals will be us teachers. Uraraka gasped as the rest of the class seemed to explode. They were going to be fighting teachers. Students against pro heroes. What chance did they have? Uraraka knew she might have had a chance against a few of them, but the rest. Let me explain, Netsu spoke up, quieting the students. You will each go to a separate arena, where you will have 30 minutes to either disable and capture a teacher with quirk-suppressant cuffs, or escape the area via the appropriate gate. I'm sorry, but due to some of these arenas being indoors, using your quirk or athleticism to jump over a border wall will not qualify as escape. You will be paired off, 2 to a teacher, and your partners will be chosen at random. Sensei, Ida quietly raised his hand. Our class has 19 students. How will this uneven problem be resolved? It was a good question, but the way it was asked worried Uraraka greatly. Back during the entrance exam, Ida had no qualms with practically yelling at Present Mike over a perceived error, yet here he was so subdued it almost felt like he was ashamed for speaking up. Did his encounter with Stain affect him that badly? Ah yes. Nedzu clapped his paws. I must admit, I did kind of lie earlier. It won't just be us teachers you'll be fighting. Nedzu then snapped his digits, and Class 1A watched as 5 more individuals appeared from behind the teachers. Standing off to the side were Moriboshi Ayam, Gakushu Hifumi, Kaguro Kiana, Sakai Hibi, and Midoriya Izuku. I know you all remember the students from Class 1C who made it to the tournament, correct? And I'm sure you all recognize young Midoriya, also known as Scouter. Well, 5 of you will be facing these students in 1-on-1 battles with the same conditions. Most of the Gen Ed kids gave snarky smiles and laughs while Izuku gave his trademark innocent smile that seemed to be the scariest expression among them. As they said this, Pro Hero 13 walked up with a table that had a box on it. Each of you, the rescue hero explained, will pull a ball from this box. Each ball has the face of a teacher or student on it. You will be facing the depicted individual. 2 balls for each of the 7 teachers, including the absent All Might, and 1 ball for each student. Good luck. One by one, the hero course students stepped forward to take a ball from the box. Some people seemed happy with their results, such as Todoroki giving a legitimate smile when he drew Moriboshi's ball, while others fell into despair, such as Kaminari and Siro paired up against Nedzu. After a few minutes, it was Uraraka's turn. She was the second to last person. Looking at everyone else, she knew the only balls remaining were one of All Might's, and Izuku's. She was stressed now. Face her mentor, the greatest hero Japan had ever seen. Or face her new boyfriend, the shy boy who beat a serial killer. She honestly didn't want to fight either one, but she had no choice. Looking behind her, she saw the quiet Ida looking at the All Might ball in his hand, while Ishido was sweating at the idea of fighting either one. She couldn't delay the inevitable any longer. Taking a breath, she shoved her hand through the hole and pulled out a ball. She looked at it, and gave a wince while Ishido turned absolutely pale. No turning back now. Chapter end note. So. How was that? All Might said his piece, and got a righteous decking for it. And yes, the Meli Dekuoka ship is setting sail. All aboard. I know we're mentioning the midterms now, but reminder that there's a certain island to visit before we see the matchups. I'm not gonna showcase all the fights, just the important ones. Next time, we see a certain limb get some upgrades, and after our heroes get a few weeks of well-earned rest we see the beginning of the I-Island Expo. Hope you enjoy what I got planned. Till next time. Results and travel chapter notes. Hello people. Here's a new chapter of Type 2 to help you through your Wednesday. This chapter is calm and full of fluff. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Oh, that's what's going on, Inko sighed as she held a hand to her cheek. That'll be quite the dilemma, huh? No kidding, Ochako sighed. I'm not looking forward to it. Ochako was currently at the Midoriya's, eating dinner with them and Eri. Melissa had chosen to stay with Mei to work on something, and give Ochako some bonding time with Izuku. Eri was sitting on Izuku's lap across from Ochako, occasionally stealing something from Izuku's plate. Ochako giggled at her antics, enjoying the fact she wasn't eating alone. I could give you some pointers if why you want, Izuku stuttered. No thanks, Ochako shook her head. As nice as that would be, I think it'd be better if I tried with my own skills and observations. If you want, Izuku nodded and with a shy smile. The shorter boy was still adjusting to the fact he now had 2 girlfriends. He hoped he wouldn't screw things up like he used to. He really did like them both, and so did Eri. He gave a quiet laugh as he remembered that Eri and Ochako had spent the afternoon together doing all sorts of things together. It was a cute sight that Izuku stealthily took several photos of. So, are you excited for the I-Island Expo? Super excited, the hero student beamed. I never thought I'd be able to go to a place like that in ever. I can't wait to see what it's all like. Melissa's from THTH there, you know, the green boy smiled. She'll be able to guide us all around. All? Inko asked quizzically. Rather than say anything, Izuku smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a pair of tickets. He handed one to his mom, who saw it had her name on it. All. Inko took the ticket, smiling with tears in her eyes before pulling Izuku into a hug. At that point, the house phone rang. Inko gave Izuku a kiss on the head before getting up to answer it. Ochako turned to watch Inko leave, and as she did she finally noticed something. She looked around the room as Izuku and Eri went back to eating. There was something missing. Hey, Midoriya-kun, Ochako asked quietly, I've just noticed your walls are covered in photos, but there aren't any of your father. Did something happen? Izuku froze at that. Rather than answer immediately, he looked down a bit forlornly. Did she say something wrong? Before she could retract her question, Izuku whispered something to Eri. The little girl nodded and slid off his lap. Izuku looked back at Ochako, but waited for Eri to disappear down the hall before speaking. He left us, Izuku whispered. Said he couldn't handle having a quirkless son. He still pays child support, but he divorced my mom and moved to America when I was F5. Don't talk about him. I'm sorry, Ochako apologized immediately. She didn't think she could handle that, having a parent just up and leave. This was just more proof at how strong Izuku really was. It's alright, Izuku smiled. It's in the past. I have friends, now. We have Eri. We have you and Melissa now. My mom and I are not alone. At the same time the Midoriyas plus Ochako were eating dinner, Shudo was laying on his futon, chatting away with Moriboshi over the phone. Before Endeavor was arrested he never had the opportunity to do something like this, and now he never wanted to stop. Talk about absolute luck, huh? Moriboshi giggled. You and me, facing each other in the midterms. I'm actually looking forward to it, Shudo smiled, an expression that had been foreign to his face for too long. When we fight, I want you to go all out. Don't need to tell me twice, Peppermint. I'll be your perfect villain. Hearing her speak like that actually gave Shudo the shivers. Whether it was a shiver of fear or anticipation he had no idea. Anyways, I have an idea. We fight the hardest we can, and the loser has to buy dinner next time we go on a date. Agreed, Shudo nodded. I like stir-fry best. Thought you liked cold soba best. You changed my mind. Damn it, when did you get so smooth? If you figure it out let me know. The two teens shared a good laugh before wishing each other a pleasant night and hanging up. Shudo sat up and stretched, getting a bit startled when he looked at the door to his room and seeing his mom leaning on the frame. He had no idea she was there. Was that her? Ray smiled. Shudo nodded in reply before Ray entered his room and sat on the futon next to him. You should bring her here for dinner sometime. I'd like to meet her. I think that can be arranged, her son smiled back before leaning against her. Ray smiled and wrapped an arm around Shudo. Ever since he got home and saw her, Shudo had been more physically affectionate than he had been in years. Without the fear of Endeavor, he was allowed to finally and truly open up and be his own person. Everyone else had changed, as well. With Fuyumi being spent more time focusing on her studies instead of trying to find ways to make that better family that she had wanted, her standing in her college had increased significantly. She had also elected to sleep in the same room as Ray, just to give some company in case Ray got a nightmare. When Natsuo got the news of what happened to Endeavor, he moved back into the house. The first thing he did was hug Ray and not let go for a good 10 minutes. As time went by, he slowly began to open up, and Shudo actually saw him smile earlier. His mood was no longer angsty and gloomy. Shudo kept leaning against his mom as he thought about these changes. Thought about how he had a real family now. They weren't failures nor masterpieces to anyone anymore. They were just people. And that's what Shudo always wanted. The following morning, the hallway to Mei's lab was filled with giggles. Melissa was pulling Izuku along while telling him, Ochako and Eri about some of her funnier exploits on Island. With each story she told, the kids were looking forward to the trip. As they approached the lab, they heard a boom of one of Mei's other inventions exploding. Izuku flinched a little bit, but nowhere near as bad as he would have a couple months ago. They waited for the rumbling to finish before Melissa gently knocked on the door. The taller girl heard a quiet, "Oh shit," followed by the sounds of scrambling and metal objects being thrown around. After a few moments, the door burst open and a singed handsome Mei leaned out. "Call me next time." Mei whined. "I was working on something volatile cuz I didn't think you'd be here this early." "Sorry," Melissa said without a hint of sincerity, "but I wanted to get Izuku his new arm soon as I could." Fair point." Mei stepped aside and let the group enter the workshop. As they stepped in the room, Eri dashed over to a small workbench that Mei set up for her yesterday to tinker with some harmless devices. As she did this, Melissa directed Izuku to sit down next to Mei's bench. Ochako occupied herself looking around the workshop, having never been inside before. "Don't touch anything, hero student," Mei shouted. "Some of this stuff is twitchy." "Okay, Mito-chan, off with the shirt." Izuku nodded and started stripping down to his undershirt. Ochako gave a flustered squeak and looked away. Melissa giggled as she started detaching Izuku's arm. May's been working hard on your next arm, the American smiled. I think you'll like what she came up with. The inventor in question smiled as she reached into a metal crate and pulled out another prosthetic arm. It looked almost exactly like his current one, but was the least bit bulkier. As May brought it close, he could see the pads on the palm and fingers had a metallic ring around the edges, and there were more buttons on the index finger. 3 buttons, to be exact, all lined up by his knuckle. The wrist also had a few more panels on it. I watched your fight against Stain, May smiled as she and Melissa began attaching the arm. Gave me loads of ideas. Firstly, we fixed the charging system for your tasers so they'll recharge a lot faster. Also, see these metal bits on the pads? We reworked the whole taser system so you can also use it through your palm. Still got the prongs if you want, but it's easier to grab things, you know. Also, speaking of grabbing, we saw you catapulting yourself around and, Mel, wanna do the honors? Melissa smiled and nodded as she held up Izuku's hand. She pressed the 2 outer buttons and Izuku watched as the panels on his wrist opened up. Melissa reached into his wrist and pulled out a mass of something. It looked like a mass of small metal filaments connected to a thicker line. This is basically a high-tech grappling hook, Melissa explained. This bundle of filaments is soft and non-magnetic, but once an electrical charge is applied, the filaments will basically cling to whatever they come into contact with on the microscopic scale. Seriously, this stuff can cling to outdoor glass. The line it's connected to has a tensile strength of 680 kilograms, so it isn't gonna snap anytime soon. It has a maximum range of 55 meters, so keep that in mind. You can also use it to grab objects and pull them to you, but I wouldn't recommend trying it on people unless you're properly braced. I'm thinking of making boots to help with that, May grinned. Until then, no imitating Scorpion. Who? Izuku asked. You wound me, Mito-chan. Continuing, Melissa laughed, we also finally got the wrist comms working, so you can actually call people through your arm. We also sharpened the sensory nodes in the palm, altered the contents of the gel layer, and reworked the wiring in all the internal components so it won't glitch up like it did that one time. As she said this, the 2 inventors finished tightening the last few bolts and let Izuku go through the exercises to make sure the arm was working. With a satisfied smile, Izuku went to work putting his shirt and jacket back on. Is it safe? Ochako asked, still looking away. Does he have his shirt on? Oh come on. May laughed. If you like the shorty you're gonna see him shirtless sooner or later. And what about you, the gravity girl glowered. Do you like seeing him like that? Girl, I don't swing that way, May smirked. Not sure I swing anyway. Married to my work, you know. At this point, Eri decided to speak up with an innocent, yet not, question. But didn't you say the frog lady had a nice butt? Eri-chan, please don't repeat everything I say. Thankfully for the entirety of UA, the following week was a relatively calm week for everyone. No major villain attacks on the news, no twists in their education, no major drama. For the students of both Class 1A and Class 1C, it was a welcome change. Almost too quickly, it was Monday of the following week. Aizawa had just finished handing out the graded tests from the previous week. Uraraka was a bit antsy as she received her test. She might have had an official invitation, but knowing Aizawa he would keep her home if she failed anyways. Taking the test, she squinted as she turned the paper over, and sighed with relief. She passed. The groans from around her class indicated that was not the universal outcome. Quiet, Aizawa droned. Those who passed, you have the privilege of going to Island this Saturday if you paid the entry fee. Remember, you represent UA's hero course. Don't do anything crazy. Dismissed. The moment he said this, Uraraka grabbed her bag and dashed out. She was meeting Melissa and Izuku for lunch today. The tall student dashed between other students, sometimes jumping over them, on her way to the cafeteria. The minute she flew through the doors, she saw the gold and green duo and rushed up to them, pulling them both into a big hug. Thank you. She cheered as she spun them both around. I passed. I get to go to the expo. She laughed as she did this, ignoring the stares and laughs of any nearby students. These two had helped her study for the test, and she knew their help played a big part in her grade. Awesome. Melissa hugged her back while Izuku was blue-screened from where his face was pressing. If you want me to, I can get you a ticket for free, Uraraka. I've actually already got one, she smiled as she set the duo back down. Since I won the festival, I got a free invite and the chance to take a guest. I want to use it to bring Izuku. Oh, Izuku finally stuttered, I actually already accepted Melissa's dash, you can use hers, Melissa gave another angelic smile. I don't mind. We're all gonna be on the same plane anyways, I'm making sure of that. You had a guest ticket too. Uraraka asked, to which Melissa laughed. I grew up there. My dad is one of the top scientists. I can get anyone there if I wanted. As she said this, Izuku got a contemplative look before looking back at Melissa. If that's the case, he asked, think you could? Saturday morning the plane was filled with Mei's excited screaming as she and Eri both looked out the window, their cheeks pressed against the glass. Inko was sitting next to them, giggling at their joint excitement. Sitting across from her were Melissa, Izuku and Ochako, also smiling at the other girls' antics. There it is. Mei screamed. Island. Oh, this is so much better than a photograph. Mommy told me the island moves around. Eri exclaimed. Like a giant boat. Exactly. Oh, you're such a smart girl, Eri-chan. The two girls kept watching as they approached the island, only sitting down when the pilot ordered it. Even then, Eri sat on Mei's lap as they both kept their eyes out the window. The two girls were squealing as the plane landed, and jumped to be the first ones off. The rest of their group just walked down, stretching and taking in the sun. It's good to be home, Melissa sighed. Welcome to Island everybody. It's so big. Uraraka gasped. This place is really man-made, huh? Look at that. Mei pointed at a light pole. Solar-powered, but it doesn't look like it uses plasma cells. And oh, is that a hoverboard? Some of the guys here use those, Melissa giggled before her eyes widened. Oh. I wonder if they kept it here. Melissa dashed off towards the gate, confusing the group as they followed. She approached what looked like a junction box by the gate and opened it, giving a squeal of joy as she pulled something out. A pogo stick? Izuku asked. One of my pogo sticks, the blonde beamed. I built a lot of these and put them around the island. They got torsion motors so we can jump pretty high with them. Come on, Izuku, I'll give you a ride. Before the greenette could say anything, Melissa grabbed him and slipped him between her and the stick, securing him in place. Izuku was immediately flustered by the pair of very soft things squishing against his back. Come on, Ochako-chan, grab a stick. I think I'm good, Uraraka smiled. You sure? Melissa asked confusedly. We don't want you to feel left out. I get motion sick on those, she giggled. I want to go at my own pace here, spend some time with Inko-san and Eri-chan. Plus, someone needs to keep an eye on Hatsum-san. As she said this, the trio turned to see Mei clinging to the leg of an unlucky scientist. Tell me your secrets. Would someone please get this strange girl off me? The trio watched for a few seconds before silently agreeing that, yes, Mei needed supervision. Well, alright, Melissa conceded. But we will be eating lunch together, alright? There's a restaurant on the main road called Uwak Bazaar. We'll meet up there at noonish, alright? Before Uraraka could reply, Melissa leaned close and kissed her cheek. Have fun. With that, she and the kinda recovered Izuku bounced away, the pogo stick carrying them many meters through the air with each bounce. Inko, Eri and Ochako watched them go, ignoring the pleas from the beleaguered scientist behind them. So, Inko smiled, what shall we do, Uraraka-chan? Melissa and Izuku soared through the air on the overpowered pogo stick. Each bounce took them above the buildings, yet each time they landed wasn't the least bit jarring. Melissa would also point out any important building they passed and give a brief explanation of the sort of research they performed. Izuku was so amazed at what he was learning he practically forgot about the very soft things against his back. Melissa herself took delight in Izuku's excitement. She remembered how sullen he was when they first met, so seeing the green bean smile so big was a treat. As they bounced past another airport, the teens heard some excitement. Izuku turned to look and gasped at what he saw. Coming off a small Learjet was All Might himself. Izuku felt a pang in his chest. The last time he had even seen All Might was the day he punched him. Ever since then, Izuku's anger had simmered and he once again felt shame at his action. He knew he should apologize for it, but he didn't know when would be a good time. Before he could even say anything to Melissa, however, the girl redirected the pogo stick away from the airport. Izuku turned to look as the blonde hero disappeared in the distance. Melissa, Izuku asked, are you dash, there's something I must admit, Melissa said with a somber tone. Truth is, I've known All Might for a long time. Why you have? Before continuing, Melissa bounced a few more times and landed on top of a small tower, giving the two privacy. You know how he went to America in the past, right? My father was a helper of his. Anytime All Might needed support, be it a new suit or a piece of equipment for a mission, my father provided it. All Might became such a common figure in my life I actually called him Uncle Might for a long time. This was news to Izuku. Why you were close. When I told him I wanted to be an inventor like my dad, He gave me his full support, Melissa continued. He was there for me, but after hearing everything that happened between you two, and why it happened. I wonder if he was only supportive because of who my father is. If I hadn't been the daughter of the amazing David Shield, or if I wanted to become a hero, would he have been anywhere near as nice? I honestly don't know. There was a bit of silence before Izuku hugged Melissa. After a few moments, Melissa teared up and hugged the smaller boy tight. I'm sorry, Izuku, she whispered. I'm sorry. It's alright, Izuku replied. It's not like you see could have known any sooner. Then he stepped back and gave his trademark smile. Let's not think about it for now. Wanna keep G going? Melissa smiled and nodded, giving Izuku another quick kiss on the lips before they went back to bouncing around. There were a few more places she wanted him to see before they stopped for lunch. Chapter end notes. Quite the ending there, huh? Our nice lil group is on Island for the expo. Looks like a fun time where nothing goes wrong, right? Right? Anyways, next chapter we'll see a few more classmates who've come to hang, and a few other things. Till next time. Travel and Lights. Chapter notes. Howdy folks. Here's something to make your Monday tolerable. This chapter is gonna be mostly fluff with some fun parts, a lil angst, and a few scenes with everyone's favorite snake. Now read on. See the end of the chapter for more notes. After a bit more jumping around, Melissa decided it was time for her and Izuku to do something important. Izuku was nervous as heck, even with Melissa giving him reassurance that nothing bad would happen. This was something that made even his fight against Stain seem tame and quiet. But this was something Melissa wanted him to do. Meeting her father, David Shield. It'll be fine. Melissa laughed as she patted his shoulder. He's been eager to meet you for a while. If it helps, just think of it like a performance interview for your arm. That doesn't help. Melissa just laughed again and led Izuku up the walkway to a large house. Izuku took in the sight, thinking about how Melissa grew up in a massive place like this, and spent so many years on this island. How it was her desire to get CLO.